Hello. Welcome to the first broadcast of Cincinnati 9/11 Truth, broadcasting from Media Central, Campbell County, Kentucky. My name is Christopher Bolin, and today I'll be speaking about 9/11 and our political crisis. Next slide. I'm on tour currently in the United States, and I'll be in 14 cities on the way over to the West Coast and returning on the backside, coming to New York City on September 9th. Next slide. The subject of this presentation that I'm giving is ending the dual deception of 9/11 and the global war on terror. Next slide. Next slide. The theme is ending the war on terror requires understanding the dual deception of 9/11 and the war on terror. When a person understands the deception of 9/11 and the fraudulent war on terror, the deception is over. Next slide. I'm the author of a book, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World, and another companion book, Solving 9/11, The Original Articles, which contains all my articles that I've written about 9/11 from September 2001 through April 2012. Next slide. This is the book, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. It contains my thesis of what happened on 9/11, who's behind it, and why they did it. Next slide. This photograph is of me presenting information at the first grand jury in California in 2004. My credentials are that I was an investigative journalist working in a weekly paper in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 happened. My background as an academic was, I have a degree in history from University of California in Santa Cruz, and my emphasis was Palestine and Israel and the Middle Eastern conflict. Prior to that, I grew up in Schaumburg, Illinois, where I was an Eagle Scout and a recipient of the God and Country Award. Next slide. So why is 9/11 Truth so important 15 years after the event? Next slide. Well, why does the murder of President Kennedy matter 50 years after the event? Next slide. The murder of Kennedy matters because the people behind the cover-up and the murder orchestrated the cover-up that followed. And the man raising his hand here, Lyndon Johnson, was the master of the cover-up. Next slide. It was a coup d'etat. The murder of Kennedy was a coup d'etat, and in a democratic society, when a coup d'etat occurs, the following government is illegitimate. Next slide. The U.S. military involvement in Vietnam spanned 2 decades, from 1955 to 1975. But, of course, our military intervention in Vietnam spiked after the murder of President Kennedy, who wanted to actually withdraw troops from the conflict. Next slide. The Kennedy assassination matters because the U.S. government continues to support the lies of the Warren Commission. Next slide. And the Kennedy assassination matters because the mainstream media continues to support and even endorse the official version. Next slide. The Kennedy assassination matters because when the government and media cover up the murder of the president, it means that the powers that be are in control of the government to this very day. Next slide. This graph shows you an idea of public opinion about the murder of Kennedy. The majority of the American population has always been of the mind that there were other people involved and that there was a conspiracy behind the murder of JFK. Next slide. So likewise, why does 9/11 Truth matter? Next slide. Well, it matters for the same reasons, that if the government is covering up the 9/11 Truth and the reasons for the war on terror, they're part of the conspiracy. Next slide. 9/11 was actually, September 11th was actually a policy coup that brought us the war on terror. And as we know, a series of wars followed in the wake. Afghanistan and Iraq are the most important. Next slide. 9/11 Truth matters because after 15 years, for the last 15 years, the media has covered up the truth about September 11th and the war on terror, promoting the false narrative behind both. Next slide. Public opinion polls regarding 9/11 have consistently shown that the majority of the American population do not believe that the government has been truthful about 9/11. In 2006, when they found that only 16% of the American population thought the government was being truthful and honest about 9/11, they stopped polling. Next slide. So our essential predicament is that if the government and media are lying to us about 9/11, it means that they, the government and the media, are controlled by the same people who carried out 9/11. And that is a very serious situation. Next slide, please. So why do the government and media cover up the truth about what happened on 9/11? Firstly, they do it to protect the real culprits from being identified and exposed. Secondly, they do it to prevent the official myth from being exposed as a pack of lies and fabrications. And thirdly, they do it to advance the fraudulent war on terror, the Zionist war agenda that is currently being waged by the United States, which is in fact the real and primary reason for 9/11. Next slide. 9/11 was a highly sophisticated false flag terror atrocity that was done to instill fear and rage in the population in order to compel U.S. public opinion to support the fraudulent war on terror. Starting the war on terror was in fact the real reason for the terror atrocity of September 11th. Next slide. The fraudulent war on terror is based on the official myth of 9/11, which is not supported by the evidence. Next slide. This slide shows you the Zionist connection at the Pentagon. We have sitting there with the red beret on his shoulder is Shaul Mofaz, the Iranian-Israeli who was chief of staff on 9/11 when 9/11 happened. And he's meeting here with the Zionist neocons, Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense on his left. Across the table with glasses is Rabbi Dov Zakheim, the comptroller at the Pentagon. And to his right is Douglas Feith. It's interesting to note that Rabbi Zakheim, who's sitting across the table from him, smiling, was the comptroller at the Pentagon at the time on September 10th, 2001, when Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, told the media that $2.3 trillion was unaccounted for in the Pentagon budget. Next slide. As we know, the American intervention in Afghanistan began in October 2001, about 3 weeks after the events of September 11th. Next slide. And the war in Afghanistan is costing American taxpayers $4 million an hour, about $100 million a day, and it has currently cost over $700 billion in the past 15 years. We have to ask ourselves, what is the American interest in Afghanistan? Next slide. This image is of Camp Bucca in occupied Iraq. This was an American prison camp where all of the leadership of ISIS spent years. People like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi are basically graduates of this Camp Bucca, where he spent 5 years. Next slide, please. This is General Wesley Clark, and Wesley Clark said that he went through the Pentagon after 9/11 and learned that the American agenda, the American defense agenda for the next 5 years was to overthrow 7 countries in the Middle East in 5 years, and he listed them. And of those 7 countries that he listed, all of them have been regime changed or invaded and devastated by the United States military, with the exception of Iran. Next slide, please. Now, what is the purpose of this overthrow of countries in the Middle East. What is the purpose of the war on terror? Well, the purpose of the war on terror is to basically balkanize the large Middle Eastern countries in the Middle East. So we have countries like Iraq and Syria, which were first and foremost the targets. And these countries have been broken into pieces, ethnic statelets, very much in the same way that Yugoslavia was broken up into 7 statelets in the 1990s. This is a process called balkanization, and it is the policy that Israel put into place in the 1980s, known as the Yinon Plan, named after a man named Oded Yinon. And we're fortunate that an Israeli scholar named Israel Shahak translated this plan from Hebrew into English, so that we're aware that this is the Israeli plan to dominate the Middle East. Next slide, please. This slide shows the constituent ethnicities of Syria and Iraq. And Iraq has been broken into 3 pieces, basically. A Shiite area in the south, a Kurdish area in the north, and a Sunni area in the west of the country. And likewise, Syria is in the process of being broken up along ethnic lines. Next slide, please. Now, this is a photograph of Hillary Clinton with devastated Syria in the background. And thanks to WikiLeaks, we know that Hillary Clinton, back in 2012, on the last day of 2012, sent an email, one of her private emails, where she talked about overthrowing the government of Syria, the elected government of Syria, the regime of Bashar al-Assad, and that we were doing this to protect Israel. So there is no American interest in our intervention in Syria, where we are supporting these militias and organizations that are fighting against the government of Syria. This is being done by our administration, by the Obama administration, by Hillary Clinton and John Forbes Kerry, in order to support and defend the state of Israel. Next slide, please. This is a quote from John Forbes Kerry, the current Secretary of State. And he says that when he talks about Syria, when he talks about Aleppo, he speaks as if he's the general. He says that, you know, if Assad thinks he's going to carve out a piece of his own country, if he's going to carve out a piece of Aleppo, Mr. Kerry says, I've got news for him and for you. This war doesn't end. And he goes on to say that as long as Assad is in power, the opposition is not going to stop fighting them. He's not speaking as an observer of the war. He's speaking as a participant in the war. Next slide, please. Terrorism has increased since 9/11, something like 4,500%. And the number of terrorist incidents is now over 10 times more frequent, higher than it was before 9/11. Next slide, please. Yet domestically in the United States, the number of terrorist victims is still a very small number. Even with the massacre that happened in Orlando, the percentage of people, the number of people that are killed in the United States by terrorism is very few. But the United States government is spending a huge amount of money per victim. So currently, the U.S. government is spending about $400 million per victim of terrorism. And that is an incredible amount of money for what is in fact a very marginal cause of death in the United States. Next slide. This is a quotation from Dr. Alan Sabrowski, in which he says that the evidentiary trail for 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq lead to PNAC, Project for a New American Century, AIPAC, and directly back to the government and the state of Israel. He says none of the denials and political machinations can alter this essential fact. Next slide. This photograph is of Bibi Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, on the right, and Ehud Olmert on the left. Ehud Olmert is currently serving a prison sentence in Israel. And what's interesting to note about him is that these are both Likud politicians, is that Ehud Olmert was in New York City on September 11th, but his presence in New York City was kept secret. Now, this is at a time when he was the Deputy Prime Minister of the State of Israel under Ariel Sharon, and he was the mayor of the city of Jerusalem, the sister city of New York City. So the real question is, why was he in New York City, and why was his presence kept secret? Next slide. 10 days later, he came back to New York, and basically acted as a big brother to Rudy Giuliani, as if, saying that we Israelis understand terrorism very well, and I'm here to help you get through this difficult period. Next slide. This image is of Ehud Barak, the most highly decorated soldier in Israel, the former chief of staff, former defense minister, and prime minister. And he was in the studio of BBC World Television in London, and he made this comment, this statement, on film before the Twin Towers had even fallen. The Twin Towers had been struck, but they had not fallen. So there's a window there of about an hour, and he was there, and he said, "The world will never be the same from today on," he said. "We know who's behind this. We know that this is the work of Osama bin Laden." And he said, now it's the time for the United States to launch an operational, concrete war against terrorism. And this became what Ehud Barak said in the studio on the BBC, which is the largest English broadcasting network in the world, seen around the world. His analysis became the official version. Next slide. The relationship between Ehud Barak, here in the sunglasses, and Bibi Netanyahu is one of their being members of an elite commando group, covert and independent commando group known as the Sayeret Matkal in Israel. And the Sayeret Matkal is independent in that it serves directly under Israeli intelligence and the Israeli chief of staff. And at the time when Ehud Barak was the commander of Sayeret Matkal, his soldier under his command was Bibi Netanyahu. Next slide. This is the New York Times on September 12th, talking about the attacks on the United States, New York City, and the Pentagon. And the headline says, "Hijacked jets destroy Twin Towers and hit Pentagon in day of terror." This simple headline actually contains about 3 untruths. That the planes were hijacked, that's not been proven. That these hijacked jets or the planes destroyed the Twin Towers, that's been proven not to be the case. There were explosives that helped. And that a hijacked jet hit the Pentagon. That has not been proven either. A former head of counterterrorism at the Department of State, a man named Larry Johnson, said, "We don't have anything in history that compares with this. The only thing that comes close is a Soviet intelligence operation." And what Larry Johnson is talking about, he's talking about the sophistication of the 9/11 crime. It was much more complicated and sophisticated than what we've been led to believe. Next slide. Some people will say, when they hear my thesis, that it's outrageous to think that Israel would attack the United States. They'll say that Israel is our only ally in the Middle East. Israel and the United States have a special relationship. But that is all disproven by the attack of the Israeli military on the USS Liberty in 1967, in June. In an attack, Israeli Air Force and Navy attack on this unarmed American spy ship that was off the coast of Egypt in international waters. And Israel had reconnoitered the ship. It was flying a large American flag, and it had been identified as an American vessel. Yet the Israelis pounded the ship with bombs, with a torpedo, with napalm. And when the American soldiers tried to put life rafts into the water, the Israeli gunships were shooting the life rafts out of the water. That's a war crime. But you have to understand how Israel thinks about the United States, it's really essential for people to understand that in 1967, the Israeli military willfully destroyed an American vessel with the intention of killing every American sailor on that boat and putting the ship on the bottom of the sea. And this was done with the idea that it would be a false flag attack, that if the ship did sink and all the men were killed, they would then blame it on their enemy, like Egypt, for example, and to give a reason for war between the United States and Egypt. Next slide, please. 9/11 is very similar to the JFK assassination because the blatantness of the conspiracy and the obviousness of the false narrative is clear to see. In the case of the JFK murder, the idea that a single bullet did all the damage to those individuals in the car and that was found in pristine condition on the gurney at the hospital in Dallas is absurd. This was, of course, the theory that was put forth by Senator Arlen Specter before he became a senator. Likewise, the government explanation of the destruction of the World Trade Center, that these were fuel fires that resulted in a gravity collapse of both towers, is clearly false. If you look at the images of what happened to the towers, they were clearly being exploded from the top down. Next slide, please. And the 110 stories in each building were 1 acre of 4-inch thick concrete in metal pans, and all of these floors and everything that was on those floors was pulverized, which indicates that there was an extremely high, powerful, energetic explosive that was involved in the destruction of the Twin Towers. Next slide, please. Now, these are just some of the basic costs of the war on terror. So far, in the 15 years since 9/11, we have already spent about $1.7 trillion just on fighting the wars. Homeland Security is another $800 billion or so. And the purpose is that this war on terror is to drain the American taxpayer and the Treasury of funds. And this war is being fought for no good apparent American reason. There's no reason why we're fighting in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. And to be spending this kind of money when this money is all being borrowed at interest is draining our country dry. Next slide, please. So the question is, where did the war on terror come from? Whose idea is this? Next slide. The war on terror is actually an Israeli stratagem designed by the Israelis and promoted by Bibi Netanyahu since 1979 to bring the U.S. military into the Middle East to wage war on behalf of the Zionist state of Israel. Next slide. The godfather of the war on terror is Bibi Netanyahu. The first meeting, conference, international conference, where the war on terror was promoted as a strategy, as a doctrine, as an ideology, was held at the Netanyahu Institute in Israel, in Jerusalem, in 1979, in July of 79. Following that, Bibi Netanyahu put together a book of essays, of speeches given by the participants in this conference, one of whom was George Herbert Walker Bush, who spoke at the final session. And later, Bibi Netanyahu came out with books reiterating this idea that the West should come to the Middle East, the Western military should come to the Middle East, led by the United States, and wage war against the Islamic terrorists who were plaguing Israel. Now, the whole doctrine, the whole spiel given by Netanyahu is based on exaggerations, outright falsehoods, and fabricated numbers. But it's still, this fraud has been pushed since 1979 by Netanyahu. The idea is, next slide, that Islamic terrorists afflict Israel and attack Israel because Israel is a Western state with Western values and Western ideas. And that, according to Netanyahu, this is the reason why it's attacked. It's not attacked because the Palestinians have some legitimate grievances or are fighting to end the occupation. No, in Netanyahu's world, Islamic terrorists attack Israel because it's Western. And therefore, the struggle is really between Islamic terrorists and the West. Therefore, he says, it's incumbent on the West to come to the Middle East to fight those entities who are resisting Israeli occupation. Now, he does this, for another reason he does this, is to delegitimize the Palestinian struggle against Israeli occupation. Now, legally, of course, the Palestinians have every right, morally and legally, to resist the illegal occupation of their land. But when Netanyahu speaks, he never talks about legitimate grievances of the Palestinians. It's only Islamic terrorism or Palestinian terrorists who are attacking Israel because Israel is free and Western. Next slide. Here are a couple of Palestinian boys resisting that Israeli occupation on their homeland. Next slide. So 22 years after the International Conference in Jerusalem on International Terrorism, the war on terrorism became real with the 9/11 attacks. So what Netanyahu had constructed, along with the Mossad and others, is a construct, a bonfire, that was prepared to be lit in the 1980s. The construct was there, and they created the enemy, and all they needed was the spark to light the fire. And the spark that lit the fire that became the war on terror was, of course, the terror atrocity of September 11th. Next slide, please. On September 11th, the New York Times interviewed Bibi Netanyahu and asked him, what did the terror atrocity that day mean for Israeli-American relations? And Netanyahu said, without blinking an eye, he said, it's very good. Then he said, well, it's not very good, but it'll generate immediate sympathy. Next slide. Later, he said to an Israeli audience that 9/11 was a good thing and was benefiting the Israeli people. He said, we, meaning the Israelis, are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. Now, I want to point out that Mr. Netanyahu has been the chairman of the Likud party since 1993. And the Likud party, the Likud coalition, which came to power in Israel in 1977, is the party of the former terrorists, the Jewish terrorists in Palestine in the 1930s and 40s, namely Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir. Next slide, please. Now, it's interesting to point out that an Israeli journalist wrote in November of 2001 that Mr. Netanyahu, the godfather of the war on terror, and Mr. Larry Silverstein, the godfather of 9/11 in New York City, that these two men had been in close contact, speaking on the phone every Sunday afternoon for the decade prior to 9/11. So the question is, what were they talking about every Sunday afternoon? Next slide. One of the questions that needs to be addressed is, how did Larry Silverstein get the Twin Towers in the first place? Because the Twin Towers were publicly owned towers under the control of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and they were privatized under a program that was being directed by Ronald Lauder. And Ronald Lauder is the son of Estee Lauder. He's very highly connected to the State of Israel and the Mossad. There's a Lauder School of Government at the IDC, which is Mossad University in Herzliya. And Ronald Lauder was put in charge of the privatization drive or program of Governor Pataki in New York State. And he was the person who decided which properties would be privatized. So he decided to privatize the World Trade Center, for example, the Twin Towers. And he decided to privatize formerly the Stewart Air Force Base, and make it a private airport. It's interesting to note that this Stewart Air Force Base, or now airport, private airport, is a place where Flight 175 and Flight 11 converged on the morning of 9/11. Next slide. So after they decided to privatize, after Ronald Lauder decided to privatize the World Trade Center, it passed the job was passed along to Lou Eisenberg, who is executive director of the Port Authority. And Lou Eisenberg oversaw the negotiations that delivered the World Trade Center into the hands of Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein, on the left here, is the former national chairman of the UJA Federation of New York, a Zionist fundraiser, the leading Zionist fundraiser in the United States. At the same time that he was on the board, Lou Eisenberg was also on the board. He was in charge of the planning policy for the UJA, Jewish Federation. So these two men share a common characteristic. They have something in common, and that is their Zionist connection on the UJA Federation. Next slide, please. This photograph is of Larry Silverstein from July 24th, when he obtained the 99-year lease on the World Trade Center. And he said he was very proud to assume ownership, stewardship of these twin towers, two of the greatest jewels of New York State. Next slide. 6 weeks later, those buildings were reduced to a pile of rubble. Next slide. So the War on Terror. What is the War on Terror? How did it evolve? And I'm going to talk about it as an evolution of an Israeli stratagem. Next slide. This man is Menachem Begin. He was the founder of he was the head of the Irgun, a terrorist faction in Palestine in the 30s and 40s. He was born in Russia, came to Palestine in 42, and became the head of the Irgun. And in 1946, he ordered the attack on the King David Hotel, a large hotel in Jerusalem, which was the headquarters of the British Mandate Authority. And this was the worst bombing terror attack in Palestinian-Israeli history. 93 people were killed. Then in 1973, he created the Likud coalition. In 1977, he actually won the election and became the Prime Minister of Israel. Then he promptly invaded Lebanon the next year, in 1978, and went again in 1982 on a full-fledged invasion and attempted occupation of South Lebanon. Next slide. This image shows the emblem of the Irgun, which was, as I said, headed by Menachem Begin. And as you see, there's a map in this emblem of Eretz Israel. And Eretz Israel is a biblical idea of the state of Israel, how large Israel should be according to biblical terms. So the Irgun the Irgun and the Likud is seeking to obtain, to reconquer land that they saw as being Israeli land 3,000 years ago. And in Hebrew it says there, rak kach, which means only thus, and meaning that only by the gun will they achieve this territory that they aspire to. Now this is rather, of course, psychopathic to think that a people who claim to be related to an ancient people should be allowed to go back to the land that was held by those ancient people and conquer it. It's similar to if the Arabs were to return to Spain and claim Spain, because their ancestors had been in power there 1,000 years ago. Next slide, please. But this is the ideology of the right wing in Israel, the Likud, and this image is of the map, what Israel's borders, future borders will look like. And this comes from an Israeli website, and it clearly indicates that from the River Nile to the River Euphrates in Iraq, all the land in between those two rivers should be considered as Greater Israel. Next slide. And there's a quotation here from Mr. Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, in 1948, in May of 1948, 1 week after Israel became a state, claimed to be constituted as a state after the war of, what they call the War of Independence, what the Palestinians call Nakba, the catastrophe. When Israel achieved this statehood in May of 1948, then he came on and told his general staff 1 week later that Israel should be prepared to go on the offensive and conquer and defeat all of its neighbors, and that if any state were to resist, they should be bombed. So this tiny Jewish state, this tiny Rothschild state, aspired to conquering and defeating its neighbors already 1 week after it was created. Next slide. This photograph is of Menachem Begin, the former head of the Irgun, and the destruction of the King David Hotel, in which 93 people were killed. And it's interesting to note that this attack was done in conjunction with the Haganah, which was headed by David Ben-Gurion at the time, and that it was a false flag operation in which the people who came into the hotel with the bombs were dressed as Palestinians. But it was very clearly seen right away that this was done, in fact, not by Palestinians, but by Jews. Next slide, please. Now, this image inside the hood here is Shimon Peres, formerly the Prime Minister and President of Israel. And this quote is from Moshe Sharett in 1955 after what's called the Lavon Affair, which was a little-known incident in which Israeli agents cultivated terror cells in Egypt of Jewish Egyptians who tried to plant bombs in British and American facilities like libraries and cultural centers with nitroglycerin. And one of the people who was involved in this false flag terror attack was Shimon Peres. And Moshe Sharett was the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Israel at the time, and he claimed, or apparently this was done unbeknownst to him. And he was very disturbed by the terrorist activities that were going on by members of Israeli military and intelligence, one of them being Shimon Peres. And Moshe Sharett said, Peres shares the same ideology as Mr. Lavon. He wants to frighten the West into supporting Israel's aims. And this is exactly the same idea, doctrine, that has been going on for the past 50 years. Israel uses terrorism in order to compel Western states to basically support its agenda and fight its wars. Next slide, please. This is an image of Bibi Netanyahu and Menachem Begin. And Menachem Begin was asked by a British journalist in 1974, how does it feel to be seen as the father of terrorism in the Middle East? And Menachem Begin said, in the Middle East, in all the world, putting on himself the mantle of being the father of terrorism in the whole world. Next slide. In 1977, Menachem Begin became Prime Minister of Israel. Next slide. And these were some of his leading allies in this party in the beginning. It's Yitzhak Shamir, the former head of the Stern Gang, or Lehi, is on the right, and on the left is Ariel Sharon, known as the Butcher of Beirut, for his participation and involvement and responsibility for the massacre of the people of Sabra and Shatila camps, and also of 20,000 Lebanese people. Next slide, please. Yitzhak Shamir was the head of the Lehi group, or the Stern Gang, which actually was involved in killing the United Nations envoy to Palestine in 1948. That man was Volker Bernadotte. He was a Swedish count. He was sent there by the United Nations to oversee the adjudication or working out of the partition plan of 1947, which was a disaster to start with. Yitzhak Shamir and the hardcore Zionists did not like the idea that Bernadotte supported of keeping Jerusalem as a separate independent city, and they killed him in Bonnie and Clyde style. Next slide. One member of that group that was involved in murdering Volker Bernadotte was this man's father. This is Rahm Emanuel, the current mayor of Chicago, and the former special advisor to Bill Clinton and chief of staff for Barack Obama. Sherman Skolnick, the late Sherman Skolnick of Chicago, referred to Rahm Emanuel as Mossad's man in the White House. And as you can see, he was the first person appointed by Barack Obama. So it was very important that this man, Rahm Emanuel, the son of a terrorist, be in the White House during the time of Clinton and Barack Obama. And it's interesting to note that Rahm Emanuel is given credit for single-handedly pushing NAFTA through Congress in 1993. Next slide. Next. That's it. This is a map of southern Lebanon. This is the area that Israel tried to conquer in 1978 and again in 1982. The only reason that they finally left this area in 2002, I believe, is because of the strong resistance of Hezbollah, the Shiite militia that sought to defend its land. Next slide, please. This image is from a movie that was made by Arnon Milchan. Arnon Milchan is the Hollywood producer that made movies like JFK and Brazil. And his first movie he made was this film called The Medusa Touch, in which the climactic scene is of a Boeing 747 crashing into a high-rise tower like the Pan Am building. And the photograph of Arnon Milchan in the striped shirt talking to Ezer Weizman, the Israeli defense minister, is from 1978, the same year that he made this film. Now, you have to understand that Arnon Milchan is a very high-level Israeli agent. He was involved in a super-secret program to obtain the components for Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal illegally in the United States. Next slide. And this is when they were making the film, The Medusa Touch. This is how they had to set up the props to make it look like the plane was going to strike the building. And as I said, this is his first movie he ever made. This is an English-French production. Next slide. Later, a company that Mr. Arnon Milchan is owner of, along with Rupert Murdoch, made this program called The Lone Gunman, in which the first episode, the pilot episode, featured a hijacked passenger aircraft being flown into the World Trade Center. And this was shown on Fox TV in March of 2001. Next slide. This photograph is of Arnon Milchan sitting between two of his best friends, Bibi Netanyahu and Shimon Peres. And it's interesting that Mr. Milchan is considered to be one of the richest moguls in Hollywood. The second one, they say. He's worth something like $5.2 billion. But the fact of the matter is that this man has a long history of being an Israeli money launderer. So the real question is, where does the money come from? Next slide. This photograph is of Bibi Netanyahu with his father, Ben-Zion Milakovsky of Warsaw, Poland. When Mr. Milakovsky went to Israel, as many Israelis do, he changed his European Slavic name into a Hebrew name. They became Netanyahu. And this photograph shows Bibi Netanyahu with his dad about 1979. And in 1976 to 1978, Bibi Netanyahu was working for Boston Consulting Group, a Rothschild-linked firm. And then in 1979, he left that Boston Consulting Group, he left the Rothschild Company, and went to Israel and started the Netanyahu Institute with his father. And that year, they had their first conference in which they began the propaganda push for the war on terror. Next slide. In 1980, 1 year after the Jerusalem Conference, an American evangelist named Michael Evans went to Israel, and he had very high-level contact with Mossad and the Israeli government and Mr. Menachem Begin. And he's one of these Christian evangelists who's actually Jewish. And he asked the former head of the Mossad, a man named Issa Harel, if he thought that Arab terrorism would ever come to America. And Issa Harel predicted to his guest that yes, Arab terrorism would come to the United States, and what would happen is that the Arabs would attack New York City, and specifically they would attack the tallest building in New York City, which is exactly what happened 21 years later. Now the question is, how did the Mossad, how did this original pioneer father of the Mossad and Shin Bet, how did he know that Arab terrorists would want to strike the tallest building in New York City? How did he know that? How does he imagine such things? Next slide, please. What's interesting is that a few years later, two of his leading lieutenants in the Mossad, Tzvi Malkin and Shalom Ben-Dor, Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor, two men that had worked very closely with Issa Harel, for example, in the kidnapping of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina and smuggling plutonium from the United States to Israel and similar crimes. These two men came to the United States and tried to get the security contract for the World Trade Center. under the name of a company called Atwell Security of Tel Aviv, which was a company that was created by and owned by Shaul Eisenberg of China. Now, they succeeded in getting the negotiations to their to get the contract, but it was discovered by somebody at the Port Authority that Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor was actually had been convicted of murder in Israel for the murder of some Palestinians, and they decided, the Port Authority tore up the contract. Had that not happened, had these two Mossad agents gotten the contract for the World Trade Center in 1987, it's very likely that the attacks at the World Trade Center would have occurred in the late 80s or early 90s. Next slide, please. Now, having lost the contract for the World Trade Center directly, what Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor did is he went and worked for Jules Kroll. And in 1993, Jules Kroll had a company called Kroll Associates. That's Jules Kroll on top and Maurice Greenberg. These are business partners. Jules Kroll got the security contract for the World Trade Center after the 1993 bombing. This is when a truck bomb went off in the basement of the World Trade Center. It was blamed on Arabs, but if you read the New York Times articles on the subject, you'll see that the FBI played a leading role in this bombing. So it looks like it wasn't so much the Federal Bureau of Investigation, looked like it was more the Federal Bureau of Instigation in the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. But the Israelis that I talked about in the previous slide had then joined in forces with these two men and gotten into the security contract of the World Trade Center via a Trojan horse, that Trojan horse being Kroll Associates. And Kroll Associates maintained control of the security contract at the World Trade Center all the way through to the destruction of the World Trade Center in 2001. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of Ariel Sharon driving an armored vehicle into Lebanon, South Lebanon, in 1982. And this was an attack in which the Israelis went to war and invaded Lebanon because somebody had shot one of their ambassadors in London, and not fatally, but wounded him. And based on this, they said it was Abu Nidal, I believe, or Abu Jihad, one of these factions, but they then invaded Lebanon in order to destroy the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And in the process of invading South Lebanon, they rounded up a great deal of Palestinian weapons, most of which were Russian-made. Next slide, please. These are photographs of the Beirut bombing of the American U.S. Marine barracks at the airport in Beirut. And that's Vice President George Bush looking at the carnage and the wreckage. And it's interesting to note that if you read the books by Victor Ostrovsky, the former Canadian Israeli Katsa officer, Mossad officer, he wrote some books called By Way of Deception, and I think Beyond Deception, in which he talks about this bombing. And he says that the Mossad knew all about the truck that was the bombing truck. They knew where it was being made, they knew the make of the truck, the color of the truck, the license plate of the truck, but they didn't tell the Americans anything more than the minimum information that it could be possible that a truck bomb might be coming your way soon. And as Victor Ostrovsky says in the book, the Mossad chief said, America's a big country. They can take care of themselves. Just give them the minimum information, which is what they did. Now, this is like the truck bombing at the World Trade Center in 1993. How is it that the Israelis know all about the truck, the make, the model, the license plate number? How do they know that if they're not involved? And if they do know these details, why did they not share this information with the United States, with the U.S. government, to prevent the loss of life? Next slide, please. Well, the war on terror was a construct that, as I said, was already defined and pushed as an ideology in 1979. But in order for the war on terrorism to go forward, you needed to have a clear enemy. You needed to have a foe, somebody to target your military against. And what happened was that the the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 provided that opportunity to cultivate a cadre of anti-Western militants who would become the foe. Next slide, please. The Mujahideen were being supported by the Ronald Reagan administration, and this began particularly in the early 80s. Next slide, please. And it was a project that was carried out by a representative from Texas named Charlie Wilson. And Charlie Wilson, here seen on the top picture, came to Congress in 1973, and he became very involved with the state of Israel. And in his connection with Israel, he then became involved with Afghanistan. And he started supplying the Afghan leader, the Afghan militia leader, a man named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who had a group called Hezb Islami, which was not very good on the battlefield, which hadn't won any battles against the Soviets in Afghanistan, which was notorious for stirring up problems with other Mujahideen groups, and most conspicuously was the most anti-Western of all the Mujahideen groups. Yet this group, led by Mr. Hekmatyar, was the group that received the lion's share of CIA money and weapons and training from Israeli military intelligence. Next slide. Now, how did this happen? Well, as I said, when Charlie Wilson became the congressman, came to Washington in 1973, he met with Zvi Rafia, the Israeli Mossad station chief in Washington, D.C. And when you read the book about Charlie Wilson's war, you read that Zvi Rafia used Charlie Wilson's office, his congressional office, as if it were his own. And he gave staff jobs to the staff. He had them make telephone calls for him and do research for him. And whenever he needed any help, he just called Charlie on the phone. And this shows you the very close relationship that the Mossad had with Charlie Wilson. Next slide. Now, the group that the United States was arming, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, and which Israel was training, this group also attracted or recruited many what's called Afghan Arabs to join their struggle. Now, these are Arabs who came from Arabic countries like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and other countries who came to Pakistan to join with this anti-Western group led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. And, of course, the most famous of these Afghan Arabs is Osama bin Laden. Now, at the time that the Israeli military intelligence was training these Hekmatyar people in the very beginning, in 83, 84, and 85, Israeli military intelligence was headed by none other than Ehud Barak. Next slide. This photograph is from Ehud Barak in 1983. He's shaking hands with Ariel Sharon as Ariel Sharon basically leaves his position as military defense chief, having been found personally responsible, guilty by the Kahan Commission for his role in his personal responsibility for the massacres in Sabra and Shatila. Next slide, please. Now, this man is named Ali Muhammad. And Ali Muhammad is an Egyptian military man who came to the United States, got a lot of training in the United States. Yet, what's interesting about this fella is that he's Egyptian, but he speaks fluent Hebrew. And he also runs through, he's like a thread that runs through all of the 9/11, all of the Al-Qaeda terror attacks of the 1990s, prior to 9/11. And he was found responsible, guilty by the United States government of masterminding the attacks on the embassies in Africa. And as a result, he was put in jail in the United States, in a federal penitentiary, from where he disappeared entirely. He just vaporized. He no longer is found anywhere in the U.S. judicial system. And the mystery is, how did he disappear? How did this Hebrew-speaking man, who was the trainer for Osama bin Laden, he's the first trainer for Osama bin Laden. He trained Zawahiri and bin Laden, and he trained the people who carried out all these terror attacks. And then he was arrested and prosecuted and disappeared. Next slide, please. Now, these are some of the men that he trained, Osama bin Laden and Zawahiri. And what's interesting is that this group that was trained by Israeli military intelligence in the 80s, early 80s, In 1990, after the first Gulf War, this group merged and became Al-Qaeda, merged into Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And this is the anti-Western group that was led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Next slide, please. This is an article that was published in Foreign Affairs, which is a magazine of the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations. This was published in 1998. It's called Catastrophic Terrorism, Tackling the New Danger. And this was a catastrophic terrorism study group, was led by Philip Zelikow, the man who wrote the official 9/11 Commission report. And he worked on this study group with John Deutsch and Ashton Carter. Next slide, please. And in this paper, in which they imagined the transforming event, the catastrophic terrorism that would change America, Ashton Carter and John Deutsch were working for a company called Global Technology Partners, LLC, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Rothschild North America. So when you look at the history of Ashton Carter, you'll see that his whole career was spent working for the Rothschild family. So we have a Secretary of Defense today who is basically an agent, a disciple of the Rothschild family. Next slide, please. The PNAC, the Project for the New American Century, published a paper in September 2000, which called for a transformation of the U.S. military to dominate the Middle East and the rest of the world. And they said that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And this document, which is called Rebuilding America's Defenses, was signed on to by all of the leading Zionist neocons, and it was a product of a family known as the Kagan family, or Kagan family, which seems to have a permanent fiefdom at the Secretary of State in the State Department of the United States. Donald Kagan is the father of the family, Lithuanian-born Jew, and his sons, Robert and Fred, were co-sponsors of this paper. They're the organizers of this paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And the paper also said that the United States should invade and occupy Iraq, and that whether Saddam Hussein is on the throne or not is not important. So it indicates that the real impetus, or the real reason for invading and occupying Iraq was simply to conquer and control this largest, most advanced Arab country. Mrs. Kagan, her name is Victoria Nuland, she's the wife of Robert Kagan, is the woman that brought us the crisis in Kiev, in the Ukraine. She oversaw the coup d'etat that happened and the installment of the anti-Russian Yatsenyuk, an act which brought the United States and Russia close to war. Next slide, please. So the new Pearl Harbor happened. It was the cataclysmic and catastrophic event that began the War on Terror. And as I say, you have to understand that the War on Terror was already defined and constructed decades ahead of time. And this was the event that was to make that war on terror, become real and operational, which is exactly what happened. Next slide, please. As I said, Mr. Ehud Barak interpreted 9/11 for the American people, for the world, before the towers even fell. Next slide. George Bush read from a Zionist script when he said that the Arabs and the Islamic terrorists had attacked America because they despised our freedoms. This is the refrain that you hear all the time in this war on terrorism, even as recently as the attacks in Orlando, Florida. Next slide, please. And then on September 20th, 2001, he spoke before a joint session of Congress and declared the war on terror was now on. And he said that, countries had to decide whether they would be with us, with the United States, or with the terrorists. So basically, bifurcating the world into two halves, those who were with us and those who were against us. Next slide. Now, the latest phase of the war on terror is, of course, this phase in which we are fighting ISIS. But what's most peculiar about this ISIS group is that they are primarily mercenaries, which is why they always cover their faces. They produce these spectacular videos, which look like they're made in Hollywood. And some of these videos show, convoys of these trucks, these Toyota trucks driving through the desert with the black flags being guided by a U.S. Apache helicopter. Well, what's wrong with this picture? Why is it that the United States would be defending or protecting this group in Syria or Iraq? What's very interesting about this group is most of the videos that come to us about this group come to us from an Israeli website known as Site Intelligence Group, based in Bethesda, Maryland. Next slide, please. This is the woman, Rita Katz. She's an Israeli intelligence officer who runs this website in Bethesda, Maryland. And what she does is she provides information to the media about the Arab terrorist threat, Islamic terrorist threat. And in this case, when the second video of an American being beheaded came out, her little intelligence group in Bethesda, Maryland, had sent out the footage, had sent the video out to the media before the group that actually made the video had even released the video. And here she's telling CNN that, within a short time after their release, ISIS said that they would be releasing the video soon. And she goes on to say that we actually had the video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. Well, how did the Israeli intelligence website in Bethesda, Maryland have a copy of the video before the bad guys who made the video had even released it? If nothing else, this shows you there's a very close relationship between Israeli intelligence and ISIS. Next slide, please. After the massacre in Orlando, Florida, of course, the New York Post had a headline, ISIS versus U.S. Mr. Netanyahu came on, made a video, and again, he tried to conflate Israel's concerns and the terrorism against Israel with the terrorism that had occurred in Orlando, saying that ISIS hates us because we are like you and we are all in this together. So together we can fight this menace that is afflicting us. And this is, again, this is the Netanyahu trick, that he ignores the occupation of Palestinian land. He ignores the apartheid system in Palestine, Israel, and says that basically we are simply being attacked because we're free and Western and liberal, and that's what they hate. Next slide, please. This just shows you some of the graphics of how much money has been spent on the war on terror. At least $1.7 trillion now. And what's important to understand is that this money is all borrowed money. Next slide, please. Now, the 9/11 cover-up is, of course, the essential part of the deception that enables the culprits to dupe the American public into supporting the global war on terror. Next slide, please. As Richard Nixon said, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. Next slide. There are three crucial control aspects of a false flag cover-up. First, you have to control the investigation and access to the evidence. Then you have to control the interpretation. That is how the event is explained to the public. And thirdly, you have to control the litigation, the court process, in order to prevent any legal discovery that would expose the fraud. Next slide. The first part I'll talk about is the controlled investigation of 9/11, or more clearly, more accurately, the non-investigation of 9/11, because 9/11 was not investigated as a crime. It was branded an act of war, and then as an act of war, the United States went to war against those who they considered to be behind it. Next slide, please. What should have been the investigation, the criminal investigation, was to be led by these men, John Ashcroft and his assistant, Michael Chertoff. Michael Chertoff is an Israeli citizen by virtue of the fact that his mother was an Israeli Mossad agent. And of course, Mr. Chertoff spent a lot of time as a child growing up in Israel. And he was given, Mr. Chertoff, the Israeli-American, was given the portfolio to investigate the crimes of 9/11, and it was his obligation to prosecute those crimes. But there was no prosecution of 9/11 crimes because there was no investigation of 9/11. So he actually oversaw the destruction of the evidence, which is what began and carried on 24/7 for the first few weeks or months after 9/11. All the relevant evidence was destroyed. Next slide, please. After his term as at the Department of Justice, he then was nominated by George Bush to be the head of Homeland Security. And as head of Homeland Security, he maintained his control over the evidence of 9/11. Next slide. Now, the U.S. government made a decision not to tell the truth about what happened. That is a quote from the senior counsel to the 9/11 Commission. And he is one of 6 members of the 9/11 Commission who admit after the fact that it was a complete cover-up. It was a complete fraudulent investigation that they did for the 9/11 Commission. Next slide, please. Here are the 2 co-chairmen, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton. And Thomas Keane says, "To this day, we don't know why NORAD told us what they told us. It was just so far from the truth." Next slide. This is the man that wrote the 9/11 Commission. This is Philip Zelikow. And he's the executive director. So his picture doesn't show up as a member of the commission. He was the executive director directing the whole thing. Next slide. And what became apparent was that he had written the entire outline for the myth, for the 9/11 Commission report, before the staff even began working. Next slide, please. Another person involved in the cover-up is this man. His name is Gene Corley. He's the one who authored the building performance reports on the World Trade Center. And here he is, a picture of him investigating the steel, looking at the steel that remained at the World Trade Center. Because all that was left at the World Trade Center was the dust and the steel. So here he is looking at the pile of steel, and I called him up and asked him, "Mr. Corley," I said, are you examining at the steel to see if there was any evidence of explosions or explosives?" And he told me, "I know nothing about that," he said. "I'm not a metallurgist." So the question is, why was this man, who's a concrete specialist, put in charge of investigating the collapse of the largest steel frame buildings in the world? Well, he was probably put in this position because of the work that he had done for the government before. He had written similar reports about the government attack at Waco, Texas, and at Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City bombing at the Murrah building. So he appears to be a person who is very competent at producing documents to support the government narrative. Next slide. This is another cover-up document. This is the final report on the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. It's written by the NIST sub-agency of the Department of Commerce. And the director of NIST at the time was this man, William Jeffrey. Family name originally was Jaffe. And Mr. Jeffrey was the director in October 2005 when they actually released this document to the public. And again, this is the final report on the World Trade Center collapse, but it doesn't mention molten metal or explosives, 2 of the things that were most conspicuous about this destruction. Next slide, please. Now, William Jeffrey has an interesting background. Prior to becoming the head of NIST, the director of NIST, he had a long history of working with advanced weapons systems for the Tactical Office and other parts of the U.S. government, in which he had a lot of experience with the most advanced weapons systems being developed. Afterwards, he became the head of a group called Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, which is a research and development organization for the U.S. military. And one of the things that they make for the U.S. military are these novel energetic composites like superthermite. They have a whole lab that develops nano composites just like that superthermite that was found in the dust of the World Trade Center. And the laboratory at SRI, where they make these novel energetic explosives and nanothermite, is headed by an Israeli man named Blum, who has been with SRI since 1984. Next slide, please. Another person who was involved in the suppression of evidence, suppression of testimonies, was the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, another Rothschild billionaire, who is very close to the government of Israel. As the mayor of New York, he served for 12 years after 9/11, and he suppressed the firefighters and the police, the first responders and the policemen who had stories to tell and sicknesses to bear as a result of 9/11. In 2008, when Ehud Barak invaded and attacked the Gaza Strip, Mr. Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg, went to Israel to give moral support for what was a war crime being carried out by Israel. Next slide. Now, this invasion that happened about Christmas time of 2008, it occurred at the time when George Bush was a lame duck president and when Barack Obama was president-elect. So it was this period of time between the two administrations, and the operation was called Operation Cast Lead. But what was most notorious about this operation is that the Israelis used white phosphorus on the people dropped white phosphorus on the people of Gaza, which is a war crime, of course. Next slide. And Mr. Bloomberg is also very close to the Netanyahu government of Israel. Next slide. And here he is, Mr. Bloomberg, showing Mr. Netanyahu around the memorial 10 years after 9/11. And the memorial had just been completed, and Mr. Netanyahu wanted to see the names of the 4 Israelis who died at the World Trade Center. Next slide. Next aspect of the cover-up is controlling the interpretation of 9/11. Next slide. Now, the interpretation of any such event is understood and comes to the American people through the media. So the media is like the entity that explains so much of our political reality. And today in the United States, about 90% of the media outlets in the country are controlled by only 6 companies. And one of the biggest companies is News Corp, which is headed by Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch is an Australian man. His mother is Jewish, and he was created as a media mogul by the Rothschild money. And the Rothschilds create media moguls like Mr. Murdoch in order to control public opinion. The Rothschilds control many of the big media conglomerates in the world, like Reuters, and in this case, they also have a great deal of influence over Mr. Murdoch. And Mr. Murdoch, in 2003, when the United States was preparing to go to war with Iraq in the occupation phase of the war, Mr. Murdoch supported that war vigorously, very strenuously supported the idea that the United States should invade Iraq. And he owned 160 newspapers. And every single editor of those 160 newspapers agreed with Mr. Murdoch on the need to invade Iraq. This was, of course, a major war crime. Next slide. This is an editorial from the New York Times from 3 years after 9/11, September 11, 2004. It is an editorial written by the editors of the New York Times. The New York Times is a family-owned newspaper. It's the largest, most important newspaper of record in the United States. It's a family-owned newspaper. The family that owns it is Sulzberger Ox family. And the Sulzberger Ox family is a Jewish family which happens to be one of the founding families of Lodge Number 1 of the B'nai B'rith, which is a Jewish and Zionist Masonic organization which was founded in New York in 1843. And in this editorial, they say, in the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened. And this is the position that the New York Times and other media have taken after 9/11, about 9/11. They have failed to investigate the crime itself, and they have failed to ever present any information that would contradict the official version of what happened. So they've basically acted as a cheerleading department for the policy to go to war. Next slide. One of the things that we don't know anything about, and the New York Times wasn't interested in investigating was what happened to this building. This is the 47-story building, WTC-7, which was owned by Larry Silverstein, which fell into its footprint at 5:23 in the afternoon on 9/11. Next slide. Now, the Israelis even have a hand in creating the legacy, the memorial of 9/11. This is Ground Zero Memorial with the cascading water falling into the ponds. And this memorial was designed and built by an Israeli, Michael Arad, who is the son of Moshe Arad, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. And this family is very close to the Netanyahu family as well. So you see that the Israelis have had a role in the ideation of 9/11, in the preparation of 9/11, in the carrying out of 9/11, and in the covering up and legacy of 9/11. So when you have such consistency, when you have Israelis or Zionists at every key point in this matrix of this crime, it suggests that the crime itself was an Israeli Zionist crime. Next slide, please. Now, the official account of 9/11 is not believed by 60% of the American population. Only 40% of Americans believe that the official account of 9/11. Next slide. Now I'm going to talk about the control of the litigation. This is the court process that followed when you had 3,000 wrongful death cases for the loss of life. Next slide, please. The judge that oversaw the 9/11 tort litigation was a man named Alvin K. Hellerstein in Manhattan. He's a federal judge appointed by Bill Clinton. And this judge oversaw the case of, in which there were 96 families who did not take the compensation money offered by the U.S. government, but held out for a court process in which they would try to find who was responsible, who was accountable for the loss of their loved one. However, what happened under this judge was basically a war of attrition in which every single one of those 96 families was settled out of court, one by one. Next slide. And there was a conflict of interest, though, with this judge because his son is a lawyer in Israel who lives on a settlement, and his son works for a law firm which represents the parent company of ICTS, which was the key defendant in the tort litigation. ICTS is an Israeli company, a Mossad company based in Holland called International Consultants on Targeted Security. It's an airport and security company, and this company oversaw the passenger screening operations at Boston's Logan Airport, for example, on 9/11. So it was the key defendant in the docket, in the case, in which the 96 families wanted to understand what happened to their loved one and who let the passengers or the bad guys on the plane. But this is a conflict of interest in a primary family situation, and the judge should not have been allowed to oversee the tort litigation because his son was working for the defendant. And it went ahead anyway, and actually toward the end of the case, Judge Hellerstein dismissed the Israeli company from the lawsuit, saying that you're just a parent company. I don't see why you're here. You can go home. Next slide, please. And the compensation fund was handled by Kenneth Feinberg, the man on the top, and he oversaw the distribution, the doling out of money for the first 2,900 families, roughly. As I said, there were 100 families left, 96 families left who held out for a trial, and they were dealt with by this woman below named Sheila Birnbaum. And Sheila Birnbaum and the Special Master Feinberg, both of these people have very close relationships with the State of Israel. And these are the people who waged the war of attrition against the relatives, so that the result was that we will never have a case about 9/11. 9/11 is an atrocity in which 3,000 people were killed, but there will never be a lawsuit or a trial to determine who's responsible. This is a travesty of justice. Next slide. Another judge who was involved in the 9/11 litigation is this man. His name is Michael Mukasey. He belongs to the same synagogue, Orthodox Zionist synagogue in Manhattan as Judge Hellerstein, and he oversaw the 1993 case in which the FBI was involved in putting a bomb in the basement, and the blind sheikh was convicted and found guilty and sent away for jail for thousands of years. This was another operation in which basically was like a sting operation done by the federal government, and Arabs were blamed for trying to blow up the World Trade Center. Mukasey oversaw that, and he also oversaw after 9/11, he oversaw the litigation between Larry Silverstein and the insurance companies, in which the insurance companies were made to pay double indemnity, pay Mr. Silverstein something like $7.2 billion, for his loss, in which he had only put down $100 million of borrowed money. Next slide, please. So the question is, what are they covering up? And if the government and controlled media are supporting are suppressing 9/11 evidence that would expose the official myth as a pack of lies in order to protect the real culprits from being identified. Next slide. After 9/11 occurred, I went to Germany because I felt it was unsafe to stay in this country and expose the lies of the 9/11 story as the government was preparing to go to war. And I met with I spoke to some of the German intelligence chiefs, and one of them told me, the first one told me, that it looked to him that 9/11 was like a Hollywood production. And I spoke with two others, and one of them said that the deathly precision and magnitude of planning of the 9/11 attacks would have required years of planning, and it would have required the fixed frame of a state intelligence organization, that it could not have been done by a loose group of students like the ones led by Mohammed Atta in Hamburg. Next slide, please. I also met with this man, Andreas von Bülow, next slide, who told me that there are 3 levels of such an operation, basically. The first level, the highest level, is the architectural level, and they plan a false flag crime like 9/11 in order to change public opinion. The second level is the managerial level, who manages the crime. And the third level, which they manage, is the working level, which he said is part of the deception. Next slide. Now this would be the working level. These would be the patsies, 19 Arab hijackers, supposedly. But what's most peculiar about this group, one of the most striking things, is that 15 of them lived in Florida, and of these people, many of them had been issued duplicate licenses, in which they had gone and gotten a license on one day, and the following day had called up to the Department of Motor Vehicles and said that they had suddenly moved and needed another license with a new address. So what you had was 2 licenses out being used in the same name. Next slide, please. This is an Israeli tactic, a Mossad tactic, known as or leaving a trail. And it's described very well in a book by John Le Carré. The book is called The Little Drummer Girl. And there was also a movie made with Diane Keaton with the same title. And in this movie, Diane Keaton befriends a Palestinian and then is involved in leaving a trail for this Palestinian man as he goes from Turkey to Germany. And at the end of the story, there's a bombing in a synagogue in Germany, and it's blamed on the Palestinian. And then at the very end, there's a car bomb goes off at a Tankstelle, at a roadside place on a highway in Germany, and of course the Palestinian terrorist is blown up in the car, when in fact he was probably already dead in the trunk. But in the book, the Mossad chief says to Diane Keaton, he says, "Terror is theater. Theater is a con trick. Do you know what that means? Con trick? You've been deceived." And I always recommend that people keep those words in their mind. Terror is theater. Theater is a con trick. Whenever you see the next terrorist attack occur, next week or in 2 weeks' time these days, because especially this summer, these attacks are coming more frequently, and they are meant to affect public opinion. And being a political season in the United States, They're being used for political advantage, to score points, to change policy. And it's very important to understand that the terrorism that's being committed, being carried out, is meant to affect how you think, how the public thinks. Next slide, please. Now, some of the anomalies of 9/11 need to be discussed, and one of them is one of the most obvious things is that the planes that struck the World Trade Center appear to have been weaponized planes, which means that they were probably not Flight 175 or Flight 11, because Flights 175 and Flight 11 would not have been weaponized. And what they were weaponized with appears to have been something attached to the underside of the plane. Here you see it's a shiny red and shiny object that is on the bottom of the plane. Next slide. And just before this plane, which is said to be Flight 175, just before this plane hit the South Tower, something was fired from the bottom of the plane, which went faster than the plane itself, and opened up a hole in the side of the tower just before the plane struck. Next slide, please. And this image shows that this object opened up a white-hot hole right where the fuselage entered the building. And this appears to have been something like a depleted uranium warhead, an armor-piercing missile that was pyrophoric, would have been pyrophoric, burning white-hot in the air, and it opens up a hole in the building that allowed the fuselage of the plane to enter without any resistance. Next slide. Now, if a DU warhead struck the building, was used, being such an armor-piercing projectile, you would expect to see it come out the other side of the building with very little blocking it. And lo and behold, the photographs of the South Tower show two objects coming out the far side of the building with great momentum. And here you see, just behind the pole, you see this white-hot object coming out ahead of the explosion. Next slide, please. And seen against the dark blue sky, the clear blue sky, you can see this object is burning white-hot and leaving behind dark oxides. And it's coming out very fast, and this is clearly not part of the plane. Next slide, please. And here you see that it's burning so hot, the white-hot object is burning so hot, that the oxides behind it are not even visible until there's a gap before they become visible. This is because they're so hot that they have to cool off a little bit before they become visible. And I asked Marion Falk, a scientist from Lawrence Livermore Lab, who had worked on all these programs from Manhattan Project all the way through Star Wars, and he taught me a lot about depleted uranium and the health risks associated with it. And I asked him if this object had the characteristics of a burning depleted uranium warhead, and he said, yes, it does. Next slide, please. And this is, of course, the attack on the South Tower. And what we see here is that there's a tremendous explosion coming out the entry wound of where the plane entered the building. Next slide, please. Here we see that the initial explosions coming out of the South Tower, and you see on the very first edge of the explosion, you see this white smoke, very, very white smoke. This is indicative of thermite, because a thermetic reaction, a thermetic explosion reaction will create white smoke and molten metal, molten iron. That would be the iron that's in the oxidizer. Next slide, please. We see a similar thing happening at the North Tower. When the North Tower was struck, we saw a white flash as the plane hit the building, just like we saw on the South Tower. And we also see a white explosion coming out the east side of the building. And it needs to be pointed out that both planes that struck the North Tower and the South Tower went directly into computer rooms that were containing banks and banks of computers. Next slide, please. In the South Tower, this is a picture of the South Tower, about 8 minutes or 7 minutes before the building fell down, a thermetic reaction began occurring on the 81st floor. And this was this became very obvious because it produced a lot of white smoke, and clearly there's a reaction going on there in the window. And next slide, please. a minute later, we saw that molten iron began pouring off of the 81st floor. And this cascade of molten iron went on for 7 minutes before the South Tower fell. It's important to understand also that the building, this floor that this is coming from, was the computer floor of Fuji Bank. And I spoke to somebody who worked on this floor, and they told me that in the summer prior to 9/11, at night, people would bring in these big boxes, great big boxes, black boxes, that were put on the floor in the computer room. And they were told that these boxes were batteries, backup batteries for the World Trade, for the computer room. But the point is he said, they were never plugged in. So I suspect that these large black boxes were actually containing thermite or thermate, and that is what produced this molten iron that we see falling from that floor. Next slide, please. These are the comments by a man named Van Romero, who is an expert on explosive destruction of buildings. And he was in Washington, D.C. that day, and he looked at the videotapes of the destruction of the Twin Towers. He said that clearly these buildings were destroyed with explosives because a jet fire, impact of the jet and the fire resulting from the jet would not produce such a result. Next slide, please. And the pulverization of the Twin Towers was clearly done with extremely high energy explosives. A gravity collapse of the floors themselves would not have pulverized the floors as we saw on 9/11. Now it's important to understand that these clouds, these huge clouds of dust that rolled through lower Manhattan were what they call pyroclastic. That is that they contained molten iron, and they were very hot. Next slide. Next slide. This is a photograph, a micrograph of the iron droplets, the iron spheres that are found in the dust. And they say that these, about 6% of the dust of the World Trade Center was comprised of these tiny droplets of iron, which of course required a very high temperature to create, because melting temperature of iron is very hot, of steel is very hot. These are most likely produced by a thermite reaction involving ferrous oxide. Next slide, please. Now, these photographs, these micrographs, are coming to us from the U.S. Geological Survey of the Dust, which is a government publication. This particular image shows a sphere of molybdenum, which is an element that has the 4th highest melting temperature on the periodic table. It's about 4,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what would have created a little tiny droplet of molybdenum? In the government version, there is no explanation for anything getting close to that temperature. So they left this image out of the publication. Next slide, please. These graphs give you an idea of the potential, the energy potential of thermatic reactions, which involving aluminum, of course. And the top 4 bars show the energy potential of thermites, various thermites, and the bottom 4 bars show you the energy potential of high explosives. And the top thermite reaction, the very first one there, is aluminum and molybdenum trioxide. So this kind of thermite using molybdenum trioxide is most likely what was responsible for that production of that, the tiny balls of molybdenum that were found in the dust. Next slide, please. And both towers were held up by box columns, 47 box columns that were very, very, they were the stems that held up the building. They held up the gravity load of the building. And these towers would not have fallen had these 47 box columns not been cut simultaneously. So when we look at these columns, we see that there's evidence of cutter charges having been applied. And behind the middle firefighter, you see that there's the column there has been cut by something that has left slag dripping down the side of the box column. That appears to have been created by something like a thermite cutter charge that cut the tower, that cut the beam, the column in such a way that it failed directly straight down. Next slide, please. These images are of the actual superthermite that was found in the dust of the World Trade Center by Professor Stephen Jones of BYU and other scientists that worked with him. And this material looked like paint, but when they heated this material up to 430 degrees Celsius, it detonated and went off with a bang and yielded more energy per gram than any known explosive. And it also produced a little tiny droplet of iron. Next slide. This is what it looked like under a microscope, and it's a bilayered material, red on one side, silvery on the other side. And the top layer is the thermite layer, the thermetic layer, and the bottom layer is iron and organic materials. And so that when the top layer burned and detonated at a supersonic speed, then the bottom layer, the gray layer, would have produced the gas pressure that created the explosive effect. Next slide, please. Whatever they put in the World Trade Center, these thermites and thermetic materials, they put so much in that it continued to react for months. And the fires, what they call the fires at the World Trade Center, did not go out until Christmas of 2001, which meant that the pile was extremely hot. So the firefighters were constantly dousing the rubble with water, but it did not get any cooler because whatever was going off, whatever was creating this heat under the rubble was not affected by water. Next slide, please. And the smoke that rose was measured and analyzed by a Davis drum that was put up there by a professor, a department at UC Davis. And this Davis drum that they put up, the Delta group put up there on a roof in Manhattan, when the smoke blew through the drum, they could analyze it. And what they found was that the smoke contained huge amounts of nanoparticles. And I asked Professor Cahill, who was responsible for putting the drum up, I said, what could have created such nanoparticles in the smoke? And he said, only temperatures hotter than the boiling point of the metal involved. And that meant that the smoke was very toxic, so that the firefighters that were walking across the pile and working on the pile were exposed to this smoke, which was laden with nanoparticles. And they were breathing this stuff in and ingesting it. And that is what caused the sickness for so many of these men. To this point, it's about 1,600 of these firefighters and first responders have died of cancer as a result of the exposure, because the nanoparticles that are in the smoke are so small, and the size of the particle is what makes it so toxic, because when you inhale nanoparticles, they don't stop in your throat or in your lungs, but they pass all the way through to the nucleus of the human cell, where they do the most damage. Next slide. And as they removed the rubble, the steel, they found that beneath the steel there were these incredibly hot spots which contained molten steel. Next slide. And the firefighters saw the molten steel, and they talked about it, and there's even photographs that show incredibly hot pools of molten steel in the rubble. Next slide. Another strange thing that happened on 9/11 was the destruction of Building 6. And World Trade Center 6 was known as U.S. Customs House. It was between Building 7 and Building 1. And before either tower collapsed, Building 6 had been devastated by an explosion. Next slide. Here you can see this Building 6 burning in the background, but this you can see by the clutter, the debris on the street, that this is after one of the towers has fallen. Next slide. And Building 6 is seen here in the lower left corner with a big crater in the middle. It's important to note that the crater goes down to the sub-basement levels, where there was a very important federal vault which contained criminal evidence for really big crimes that were being prosecuted by the agencies in Building 6 and Building 7. Next slide, please. And this is the Pentagon. We're told that, of course, that a large Boeing aircraft came across the lawn and smashed into the building without leaving any parts of the plane on the lawn, and obviously not taking out these cable spools that are on the lawn. Next slide, please. And that this plane, having entered the building, that the fuselage of the plane acted like a cookie cutter and cut its way all the way through to the inside wall on the E-ring, leaving a hole in the wall. But that doesn't make sense, because for the fuselage to go through to the wall and leave the hole in the wall, it would have had to take out the columns that, as you can see, the red and the yellow and the blue columns are still standing. So it simply doesn't make sense that that could have happened. Furthermore, the fuselage of the plane doesn't have anything like the strength required to go all the way through the building and cut a hole on the other side. Next slide. This is the hole that was left on the E-ring. Next slide. And this photograph as well. These photographs are courtesy of the FBI because the FBI locked out the engineers, not allowing them to enter this part of the building at all. Next slide. And these are the first responders that went into the Pentagon. And as you can see that they are very well protected because they knew they were going into an environment that was extremely toxic. So they wore respirators. Next slide. And they were decontaminated after they came out of the building. Next slide. And this is the final slide. This shows the hole in the Shanksville mine where we are told that a large Boeing aircraft went into the ground. When I went to the local paper and asked to discuss this with the newspaper, they sat me down with an active U.S. military officer named Labor Knight, and I asked him, how can you explain that there's no evidence of a plane in this hole? And he said it's very simple. You have to understand that the ground was very soft and the plane came very fast, and the ground liquefied and swallowed the plane. But he said one wing bounced a half mile in the woods. What's that all about, the half mile in the woods? Well, that is the debris field where they actually were looking for, the FBI was looking for and picking up, I suppose, human remains and parts of the aircraft. We never saw any pictures from there, but that's where the actual recovery of debris was going on, around the cabins of the Hoover family. So Shanksville is just probably one of the most obvious aspects of the crime that indicates that what we've been told is an empty pack of lies, just as empty as the hole, where the coroner went and he said after 20 minutes, he said, I stopped being a coroner because there were no bodies there. But what was in the woods? And why was that debris field in the woods kept secret from the American people? I spoke to Reverend Hoover, who owns the cabins where the recovery of the debris was actually going on, and I said, Reverend Hoover, why have you not been forthright and honest with the American people and told us that the actual recovery of the debris was happening around your cabin in the woods? And he said, well, I was just trying to cooperate. So next slide. So the question is, people always ask, what can we do? Well, I tell them that the war on terror is meant to cause distress, confusion, and fear, as it enslaves us to an open-ended criminal war agenda. To accept it without resisting is not rational, and to do nothing is not a sensible option. So what can we do? There are three things that I tell people they can do. Any person can do this. Inform yourself so you can help undeceive others about the deception that changed our world. Organize with other people who are dedicated to truth and peace. And these people are good people because anybody who's dedicated to truth and peace is a nice person. And thirdly, act. Take meaningful action to expose the deception and stop the war on terror. So thank you very much. And now we can go to the interview and ask some questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming. Really fine job. My name is Michael Cook, and I have been active in 9/11 Truth here in the Cincinnati area for quite a few years. We used to do a television show like this over in Cincinnati at Media Bridges, and that got shut down. Media Bridges went under. Very happy to be back over here at Media Central. Thank you, good folks. Hopefully we'll be doing a lot more shows. This is the first chance I've had to get in here. This is just a wonderful way to kick it off. Really glad you guys could come through. Last night we did a presentation in Westchester at the library, and it went very well. I think we had 27 people or so show up, and it was refreshing for me, especially because I volunteer with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they only discuss the evidence of the buildings being destroyed by controlled demolition, and don't go anywhere else. And that's a good tactic because that evidence is unassailable, and they are building professionals, and it's none of their business, all this other intrigue. But everybody wants to know, well, who's behind it? Who's behind it? And everybody says Bush and Cheney. But this Israeli topic is a taboo one. It's difficult for people, you know, that anti-Semitic charge is labeled and things like that. I'm certainly not anti-Semitic. I have Jewish friends. I almost married a Jewish girl at one point in my life. And I know that the same. Were you on a kibbutz for a little while?
Yeah, I've been to Israel many times, and mostly in the early 1970s. I spent a lot of time there, and that's where I learned about Zionism because you know, obviously, if you live on a kibbutz and spend time there, you're gonna learn about it from them.
Right, right. So. I'll tell you. So. You know, I see it really as all about power and control and money, and you know, I'll go ahead and say it, evil. You know, I mean, there are evil things going on here with all of this. So I don't care really who you are. You know, if you're involved in this, covering it up, whatever, then we want you, and we got to have you to have a good, safe, sane world again. Would you care to give us like kind of a brief synopsis of your experience of before, during, after 9/11? Up to
yeah. Well, I lived in Sweden, and my wife is a Swedish citizen, and we lived at that time. My son was born there, and the year before he was born, there was a shipwreck. A passenger ship went down between Estonia and Sweden, in which 1,000 people were killed. And as my wife's former husband was on that ship and died on it, you know, we were interested in finding out what happened. And what was very clear was that there was a cover-up going on. And this was just a ferry boat going from across the Baltic Sea on a windy night, but not a terribly stormy night. It happens every day. The ships go all the time. And this time the ship went down, and we were told that a monster wave had sunk the ship. But the truth be told, the ship was actually smuggling military contraband from the former Soviet Union, from the Russian arsenal, from the Kurchatov Institute. And this contraband was being taken with the connivance of the Swedish government, Swedish media, Swedish military, government, and at a toll, customs, and that this material was being taken every week, illegally, contraband, on a passenger ferry to Sweden. Then it was being taken to an airport, to the airport there, and then it was being flown on the air corridor to Egypt, to a third country. They don't mention the third country.
Yeah.
I think it's Israel.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the details of this crime, there's a lot of people who are tied to Israel involved in it. Well, I did a lot of investigation in that and translated a book and did a lot of research. And I realized that in our modern times, some democratic states, some like Sweden or the United States, will cover up a crime when it's politically expedient to do so, or when it's necessary to do so,
yeah,
or when their bosses tell them to do so.
Right.
And then, you know, I came back to the States. I was working for IBM in my hometown, and I got the opportunity to write for a newspaper in Washington, D.C. So after having spent 2 years at IBM, I went over and started working in Washington, D.C. for this little newspaper. And I did so because I wanted to write about things like this Estonia catastrophe, like the cover-up that I'd seen. And the very first year I joined that paper, I went to the NTSB hearings about Flight 800, TWA Flight 800. And the cover-up of TWA Flight 800 was so blatant that I realized that this problem, you know, is now American problem.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a year later, 9/11 happened, and there again, this was a terrible atrocity. And what was very obvious, it was being covered up from day one. So it fell right into my lap. So I began investigating. We were actually passing through New York City on September 11th, and my wife was actually, telling me a dream that she had about airplanes attacking us as we were driving past the World Trade Center at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
So, but as I said, this fell right into my lap, and being what I perceived to be a cover-up from day one, it was like my skills in sniffing out government cover-ups had been developed over the past 10 years. So it fell right into my lap, and I started investigating it. And it began a hypothesis. I started with a hypothesis that because there was evidence that indicated this looked like it may be an Israeli false flag operation. That was possible. So I used that as a hypothesis and kept that in my mind as I did more research. And as time went by, year after year, more and more information became available, and I understood more and more that every single player in this saga was either, the key players were either Israelis or they were Americans who were dedicated to the State of Israel, or Canadians that were dedicated to the State of Israel. And so this became a consistency. The consistency was 100%. Yeah. So now it then became a thesis. After a period of years, and when enough evidence, the preponderance of evidence, made it clear to me that we were being lied to, and that the buildings had been exploded, and that there was a very significant Israeli involvement, Zionist Israeli involvement in the terror attacks of 9/11. Then I was, when I came back to this country in 2005, and I was working on this, and I went out to California and met with Thomas Cahill, and I met Professor Jones in Utah. Then the discovery, the evidence strongly indicated that thermite, some forms of thermite, had been used in the World Trade Center. And that seems to have been a discovery that was not supposed to happen. Because when it did, I was attacked at my home by undercover police. Professor Jones was attacked on a radio station, on a radio show, NPR radio show, and he was suspended from teaching the next day. Yeah. So it seems like we were attacked for this discovery and discussion of thermite in the dust at the World Trade Center. And then I wound up being prosecuted by these undercover police for having attacked them and resisting their arrest, although they were completely unidentified men dressed in blue body armor and blue jeans who marched up my driveway. Well, then we went into exile. We went to Europe, and I began writing the book. I began writing Solving 9/11, Deception Changed the World. And
sorry, let's check your microphone. Your battery must have died or something.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, it's at full. Now it's done.
testing.
And battery's out now.
Oh, battery's out.
Yeah, boy.
When did the battery go out?
Just a minute ago.
Okay.
They can still hear you a little bit on Mike's microphone. So
That we could go on for a long, long time about all this stuff. I see, echoes of the Lusitania, right, in the Estonia thing, where it's a tactic that they'll use to ship illegal arms on passenger, so that they're trying to hide it, but the spies find out what's going on, and the ship goes down, and boy, sometimes then you have a casus belli, excuse for war, like with the Lusitania, and the TWA 800 is. I agree with you. That is just blatant as hell. It seems to me it was a honest mistake, that it was not intended to happen, but the U.S. Navy was doing drills.
Right, in a passenger zone.
And not maybe the brightest idea.
No.
But that apparently is what happened. Is we accidentally, in a naval operation, shot down our own flight, and then they covered it up. And they covered it up as best they could, but a whole bunch of people saw a missile go up and hit the plane. Can we talk about money and books, Sam?
Yeah, you can talk about whatever.
Oh, okay.
I'll just finish what I was going on here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, can you hear me now? Yeah. So I started writing this book when we went to Europe. I started writing the Solving 9/11 because I wanted to vindicate myself and to show that there was no, this was not hot air, this was not conjecture, was not speculation, but that this was all based on factual evidence. And so I wrote the book. It took, writing this book took the better part of 5 years, and it's based on, of course, the articles that I wrote over a 12-year period.
I'm interested in getting that book. I have this one, but I don't have the
bigger one.
the complete.
Yeah.
With all the articles that led up to this.
Yeah.
So that would be cool.
Yeah, the thing is that the Solving 9/11 set of books, it's 2 books. And it's a set because they have the same Library of Congress number because it's actually one book. This is the thesis, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. And the mother lode of information is in the larger book, Solving 9/11, The Original Articles. And that book contains my articles that I wrote from September 2001 all the way through to April or May of 2012.
Yeah. And where can folks order that?
Well, they can get it through my website, Bollyn.com, BOLLYN.com, or they can get the books through Amazon.com or anything like that.
Anything like that.
Yeah.
Is it better? Do you get more money if it goes through your site?
Oh, it's maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
I offer the set to people in the United States for $40 for both books.
Okay.
So that's a little savings. That's
Yeah.
less than they would get it from Amazon. They would save.
Cool.
They save about $5 that way.
Great, great. And the other thing is you're doing this tour, and you've still got a lot of miles to cover, and folks can donate to the tour on a crowdfunding thing, I think.
Yeah, there's something like that going on. That's not being led by me.
Claudio set that up.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
there's something like that going on, but there's also my website. They can go to Bollyn.com and donate by PayPal. So, but as you say, yes, I'm going from here. We're going out to Minnesota and Wisconsin next week, and then out to Washington State and Idaho, Oregon, California, and then back through Arizona and New Mexico, Colorado. And then I'll be in New York and Washington, D.C. in September.
Cool.
For the big.
For the big, yeah.
Yeah, and that'll be the end of the tour.
Cool. If folks are interested in catching you, I know that this is very much a flying by the seat of the pants operation, and people like myself and others here that have been helping out. Thank you, Jim Condit. Thank you, everybody who's helped out. The best place to find out the current information on when and where you'll be is on the Solving 9/11 tour on Facebook.
Yes, there's a page for the tour, Solving 9/11 tour page on Facebook, and I have the events there. Also, my website, Bollyn.com, I maintain the calendar there.
Great.
And as you say, new events come along, and there will be more events, in August and September, which have not yet been announced. But the thing is that it's the reason why I'm doing the summer tour. It's not the best time to do a tour because people aren't in school, people are on vacation, it's hot, it's summertime. But it's very important because we're in this political period in which a new president will be installed in November or in January, next January. But we're in this,
elected.
yeah, selected,
whatever.
elected. But the thing is that none of the candidates that are running for office, high office in this country, are calling for an end of the war on terror, and none of them go anywhere near talking about 9/11 truth.
That's not exactly true. We've had a major breakthrough. This is the first time that 9/11 has come up in a presidential election. Trump talked about the dancing Muslims. He was wrong. They're not Muslims. They were Israelis. So the information that I've been familiar with for a few years now on Israeli involvement, there's a couple of YouTube videos that are very reliable. This is solid information. One, you can Google up or YouTube up the Mossad truck bombs, and that has the police communications on it, and you can hear the police talking about it. And it doesn't go very long, but if you do more searching, you can find one of those policemen who, it's actually New Jersey police, who pulled over this van that had a mural painted on the side of it with planes flying into buildings in New York City, and the men fled the truck. It was like a Ryder moving van type truck, and then the truck blew up. And they apprehended the men and took them in, and they were released and went back to Israel. And then, so that's one, the Mossad truck bombs video, and then the other one is the dancing Israeli video. And this were people had tripods set up filming when the first plane came in. And after the plane went off, you know, everybody looked, and they looked in. These guys got cameras out and they're celebrating, and they call the cops, and the cops pick them up. And some of these guys actually went on TV in Israel, and when asked, what was your purpose in America? Why were you there? One of them very stupidly said, well, our purpose was to document the event. So, I mean, how do you know there's going to be an event, right? It smells very, very bad. So although Trump got it wrong, calling them dancing Muslims, I was kind of bouncing off the walls at that. And he's also said that if he's elected, we'll find out who blew up the towers. That is, I don't know that it would happen. I know some of the folks in the movement are very excited about Trump, thinking that nothing else really matters. This is the only thing that really matters. And maybe he'll actually do something, but I kind of feel like he's the sort of guy that'll say or do anything, you know, con man. And if it's going to get him in, he'll talk about it. I think, you know, we are a coveted voting bloc now, the conspiracy crowd, right? So they may be pandering to us. I don't know.
Oh, there's no question about that. Yeah, absolutely. The alternative, the people who are looking at the alternative media, that number of people is growing all the time. And so that's why it's also very important for the powers that be to control the alternative media, which they do.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, it's just a a fact of life that the media is the most important political tool in the United States and most parts of the world, and because people understand the world according to what they learn and hear and are informed by the media. And the alternative crowd, the crowd that has already turned its back on CNN and Fox News, these are the alternative people who are looking for the truth, and they're going to the alternative media. And of course, the powers that be have seen this coming in advance, and they have their control mechanisms in place already, so that like one example is Alex Jones out in Texas, in Austin. When the Orlando shooting took place, for example, one of his men named Watson had made a little video and put it out on YouTube in the name of Infowars.com, in which he blamed Islam and said that Islam needs to be reformed because Islam is anti-gay and all that, and he got this out there very, very early when it was still only thought that 20 people had died. So that's quite early in the situation. And what he said, though, his allegation that this was Islam and this was radical Islam had done this, and that they were doing this because they're anti-gay. This is exactly what Mr. Netanyahu said 3 days later.
Yeah.
So it's like the similarity. So you see, in situations that are very, very important, when they really want to get the narrative out there early to affect people's mentality, how they think about these things, and you see such a disinformation effort coming out from Alex Jones, you have to say, what's going on here? So that's how disinformation works. They give a lot of good information in order to attract the bees, and then when necessary, they throw that little curveball in there to take the bees off course.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that it's working very well. I think a lot of folks are getting pretty wise, and when they hear that echoing the official Islamophobia coming from InfoWars, they go just like we do. What the heck? What's going on here? This isn't. It's hard for me to know for sure sometimes what's going on. Sometimes it's pretty obvious that somebody's spreading disinformation or part of the official thing. But yeah, it's something that folks who are maybe new to the movement, I had an experience where I was talking to a police officer in Cincinnati, and he was going to listen to me about 9/11 truth, but the first words out of his mouth were, "I believe planes hit the buildings." And I laughed and I said, well, I do too. I think that this no planes thing is a disinformation program meant to discredit all this really super credible evidence put forth by architects and engineers for 9/11 truth and scholars for 9/11 truth and justice. We got PhDs in physics and high school physics teachers like David Chandler just laying everything out. So they've come up with BS to try to combat it.
Absolutely.
So anybody who's just getting into this needs to be on guard. You may encounter someone called Judy Woods, who we consider to be disinformation. She claims it was space beams, Star Trek, Star Wars style technologies are super secret. We don't even know they exist, and they blasted the towers with it. Of course, there's zero evidence for this, and there is plenty of evidence for the thermite and the nanothermite, and so you just go with the best evidence.
Well, the Judy Wood book was meant to basically steal the thunder from the discovery in 2009, the published paper by Stephen Jones and the other scientists showing the superthermite and the evidence of superthermite in the dust of the World Trade Center. And that discovery was, as I said, not supposed to happen.
Right.
And when it did happen, they needed to steal the thunder from that, because that, of course, became the leading theory.
Right.
So in order to try to steal some of the effect of that, they came out in 2010 with Judy Wood's book. And Judy Wood's book says in the very beginning and in the middle and the end that the destruction of the World Trade Center was a cold event.
Right.
And then her discussion in the book, which is very short, about the thermite is completely wrong, and she doesn't even discuss nanothermite. So, but as I show in my presentation, you don't, from a cold event, you don't get molten iron, you don't get tiny drops of molten iron, and you certainly don't get tiny droplets of molten molybdenum.
Yeah.
So it was an extremely hot event. Yeah. We know that. So her book is meant to basically be a challenging red herring to distract people and to divide the movement.
Right.
That's the thing you have to understand is that from a strategy they want to divide and cause divisiveness in the movement.
Yeah.
So that if you in any 9/11 truth group anywhere in the country, you can have somebody, an agent, step along and say, "Hey, I've got this book from Judy Wood. You should all read this."
Yeah.
Christopher Bolin is wrong, and that's exactly what they did in some of these groups. Like I know in Davis, California, that happened. So it's a red herring.
Yeah.
And I think so is the man, the Russian man who Dmitry Kolozov, I think his name.
Right. The
who talks
mini
about,
nukes.
Yeah, he says that that there was a hole drilled, into the bedrock of Manhattan, something like 100 feet or 200 feet deep, and there was some sort of nuclear bomb put down there, and that nuclear device, somehow caused the towers to fall from top down.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
But it's just simply meant to be a distraction and to confuse people.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's all kinds of, very solid ways to debunk, but it takes time and energy away from the things we should be doing, and it causes divisions among people. And people waste incredible amounts of time arguing online and stuff. I am a union carpenter by trade. I've built a lot of big buildings. I build bridges on and over the freeway, and I poured 500,000 yards of concrete. I was on a job where 500,000 yards of concrete was poured for this one big Intel computer chip factory, actually. And I've installed the floor pans that are used in steel frame high-rises. And in the Twin Towers, each floor was about an acre in size, and there was about 110 floors. give or take. So you're talking 220 acres of these floor pans, and almost none were found in the debris.
Right.
And we even have the governor of the state of New York on camera remarking about where's the floor pans. 220 acres is a lot of material. This is durable material. It doesn't really contribute to the structural strength of the building. All it does, it's a concrete form that you don't remove. You weld it, tack it, bolt it, whatever, to the structural steel, and you can pour the concrete on it, and it supports the wet concrete until it cures. Once the concrete is cured, it's self-supporting and adds to the structural strength. But you just leave it up there because it'd be way too much work to get it out, and you don't need to. You just move on. So chances are good they sprayed all those floor pans with the nanothermite. And the places where these are located is often places I've been into several times where workers can get in to access water, power, communications, utilities, infrastructure, the ductwork, your heating and cooling, to work on it. You know, sometimes stuff needs to be fixed, sometimes it needs to be rerouted. It's not going to be over here. The water fountain's going to be over here now, and you got to get in there and move those pipes around and things. So it's a area of the building that people could be working down here and not even see the folks above this ceiling grid climbing around up there and doing stuff. And the guys that sprayed it may have not even known what it was. They could have been told it was fire retardant or asbestos abatement or something like that. So they sprayed the Sol Gel nanothermite all over, and when it went off, it pulverized the concrete and vaporized the floor pans. It's all pretty provable, a lot more than mini nukes or space beams.
Right. And the evidence is, that's the evidence that has been found. We have evidence of thermite, we have evidence of superthermite, and we have evidence of what they produce, the white smoke and the molten metal.
Extreme temperatures.
Yeah, and this has been, not only has it been found, it's been analyzed and presented in a peer-reviewed paper. So what I've always told people who support these other theories like nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs, or Judy Wood's theory, is that these people, Judy Woods and other people, they're certainly scientific enough to know that in this country, in the scientific community, when you want to present information or evidence for the first time, you do it in a way that it is reviewed by your peers. That's how it's done.
Right.
And if they had compelling evidence to support these Buck Rogers beam weapons or nuclear bombs, they would have presented it by now.
Yeah.
In a peer-reviewed paper. They haven't done so. So it's pretty clear they don't have the evidence to back up these.
Yeah, and the
claims.
nanothermite is in the peer-reviewed journal.
Yes.
And it is not the only 9/11 article to pass peer review. There's some others. They're very technical.
But the thing is that here we are 15 years later, and it's really not even essential or necessary that we discuss the details and the minutia of what happened to the towers, what happened to the passengers, what happened to the planes, et cetera, et cetera. We're simply not able, we don't have enough information to understand every aspect of this crime that was planned over decades and carried out with great sophistication. But we do know that the war on terror was the reason for this attack.
Yeah.
And that this is, now 15 years later, we can see what the attacks were meant to produce. And the war on terror is now the open wound on the American body politic that is bleeding us dry and spending our money and ruining this nation, our prestige, our standing in the world, and creating havoc in across the Middle East and North Africa. I mean, what the Obama administration has done in Syria is criminal.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Yeah, they gave him a Nobel Peace Prize when he first became president. But for the Obama administration to have waged this war by proxy, to overthrow the government of Syria, and to have displaced half the population, is just obscene.
Yeah.
And the media doesn't ever tell us that. But if the Obama administration were to just stop engaging in Syria, and stop supporting these proxies, stop supporting these radicals and ISIS and what have you, the war would be over.
Right.
It's all a big game.
It is, well, to them it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
Again, for folks that want something really simple, quick, and easy, there's a YouTube video out there. If you put in John Gross Extended, it'll be the first hit, and it's about a 6-minute movie where you see John Gross, lead engineer for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, denying the existence of high temperatures in molten metal, and then a bunch of the proof for it. And there's no way that anybody can look at that and not see something wrong with this picture.
Right.
So that is maybe a nice way in the door. Right. There are an awful lot of exciting, encouraging things going on right now, not to be too doomy gloomy, but we've got Brexit now, and Britain getting out of the EU, and Hungary, the president of Hungary just today said that he wants a referendum there. There's an extreme right-wing party of Germany that have laughing and said, yeah, we want out too. And they basically are the EU economically. We've got the 28 pages. Talk about that for just a minute. It's pretty current. Our congressman here in Campbell County, Thomas Massie, he's more than Campbell County, it's whole northern Kentucky. I met with him, and he's supporting us pulling out from the UN. He's got a bill for that. He's got a bill to audit the Federal Reserve, and he also is on board with releasing the 28 pages. There were 28 pages from the first initial Senate investigation of 9/11 that Bush was trying to prevent, where when they produced it, Bush or CIA, somebody, I'm not sure who exactly, redacted it, so no, this is endanger national security, like they always say. So we can't have this in the official report. But a number of people, including Congressman Massie, have read it, and they say, no, this needs to be public knowledge, and it has to, apparently, I mean, it's top secret, but now there's been a bunch of leaks and everything. If the leaks are accurate, reveals funding going to these alleged terrorists from Saudi Arabia, including Bandar Bush, a close associate of the Bush family. Kevin Ryan, another of our great snoopers, sleuthers, has called it the Get Into Saudi Arabia free card. And perhaps if we pin some of 9/11 on Saudi Arabia, that's where we'll go to war next and grab what's left of their oil and take back all the billions or trillions that we've given them over the years. But it is something that they don't want released, so we should support its release. You know, it's information, and we kind of let the chips fall where they may. There's been a breakthrough. Maybe you could help me with this. I don't know. Larry Silverstein recently, in the last few months, made a slip of the tongue, or maybe not, in a speech, and he said that the plans were ready. They began development or something on the new WTC-7 building in April of 2000.
Yeah.
Well before the existing one came down. You can't make this stuff up. It is. So I'm wondering, is there any kind of way we can find out when those plans were completed? Some company drew them up, and maybe there's a public record kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, well, he said he was speaking to this building society, building center in Israel on a kibbutz, and it's he was talking, the video is from, I think, 2010 or 2012, but he was speaking in English. He was chewing gum at the same time, and he talked about, as you said, that the plans were to rebuild Building 7. They wanted to build, he says, a 2 million square foot building, but they wound up building a building that's going to be 1.7. But he says then very clearly that the first design team had a meeting, and he says in April 2000. And then he goes on to say that the construction began shortly after that in 2002. But of course, between April 2000 and 2002, something very important happened. building number 1 fell on 9/11. And, but Larry Silverstein is a strange person. He's also been very forthright about, as he said on American public television, that, they decided to pull the building.
Right.
That's a demolition term.
Yeah.
And then he says, and then we, sat back and watched it come down.
Yeah.
So it's like this is a man who doesn't seem to be very cunning at covering up his tracks.
Puts his foot in his mouth a lot, doesn't he?
Seems like it.
Yeah, yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know, I mean, pull it. He said pull it, and that is a demolition term to bring the buildings down. And the idea that you could rig a building of that size to come down in a few hours, it would take weeks or months.
But what's clearly lacking here is we don't have the ability to prosecute these criminals.
Right.
We can investigate, we can research, but we cannot bring them to book. That has to be done by the political authorities in this country, the politicians, and the law enforcement.
And the international community too. I mean, we had the trials after World War II, the Nuremberg. In South Africa, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they were just trying to put the past behind them, find out what happened, and so on. I always like to try to bring people back to, the reason they did 9/11 was to affect public opinion.
Yes.
It was a PR campaign, a stunt they had to do to get public opinion to do what they wanted, so they could do what they wanted.
And part of that, a big part of that, was to start the war on terror.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get American public opinion to get behind this crusade, as George Bush said first, that this was a new crusade against the Islamic world. And as we know, that even going back in the 1980s and 1990s, they talked about the next war would be a war against Islam, and that if there's any future, if there are any concentration camps in the future, there would be concentration camps for Islam, Muslims.
Yeah.
And that's what we've gotten. We've gotten this war on terrorism, and after 9/11, since 9/11, we've left like 6 countries on the side of the road as roadkill,
Right.
devastated, destroyed. And like I said, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan,
Libya.
Libya. Where does it end?
Right.
And so we have to, this has to stop. The war on terror has to stop because it also affects this nation. We are not invulnerable, and we are not almighty. It's not like we can just wage war around the world and that nothing comes back to us and we don't lose anything. We're losing a lot.
Yeah. As well as our soldiers just, being what's right and everything. But we have the same problem they have. They needed public opinion, and we need it too. If you're ever going to get anything happen, we have to win the hearts and minds of people. Right. And it is happening. It's slow. And it's, when you realize how urgent the situation is and how slowly the transformation is happening, it's a tough situation to be in.
You mean the transformation for 9/11 Truth?
Yeah.
And ending the war.
Ending the war,
Yeah.
getting criminal prosecutions of these people, all of that.
Yeah. Well, you see, the first step in any, the first step is exposing the deception that's being foisted on us by the media and the government.
Right.
And that's why I go on these tours and why I wrote my books and why I promote my books, because when people understand the deception, then they are equipped to do something about it.
Right.
But as long as people are still living in the false reality of Fox News and CNN and network news in this country, as long as they're under this, as long as they're deceived by the lies, then they are unable. They're unable to see which way to go.
Right.
But as soon as they understand the deception, then they are at least prepared to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, you can't really do anything if you're lost in la la land.
Exactly.
And that's where they're trying to keep you, and that's why we're here to break you out of it. I'll bring folks' attention to a really good new film that came out just this year, I think, maybe late last year. Massimo Mazzucco is the Italian fellow that made it. September 11th, The New Pearl Harbor. 5 hours long. If you're a trooper, if you can do it in one sitting. I did it in 5 sittings. or maybe 6. But it is chock full of all kinds of really great information. And I've been all over this for a long time, and I still learn things in there. There was stuff that was new to me. So we have all kinds of tools that you can use to reach out to people, available for free on the internet. Always happy if you'll purchase something and support something if you think that it's good. Experts Speak Out. 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out is the film by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. It was actually my idea. I had the concept for it, and other people took it and ran with it and did all the hard work to make it happen. Translated into 18 languages now. And you can watch that, a free 1-hour version. The full version is like an hour and a half if you want to spend the money for it. Something that I'm supposed to get done is come up with a list of milestones, of breakthroughs that we've had over the years to submit to our video people at Architects and Engineers, and they want to put together a kind of a rally the troops, look at how far we've come sort of thing. Long ago in Japan, there was a congressman or senator, they call it the Diet over there, Fujita, I think was his name. He made presentations before their Congress showing them Building 7 come down, talking about all this stuff. Totally awesome. Nothing's come of it, but I mean, that was really something. We've had the former Italian president come out and say 9/11 was obviously an inside job. In Malaysia was the first country to officially declare 9/11 an inside job, and we need a real investigation and prosecution. And right after that, they started having all the problems with their planes. I suspect that was related. Another good one, it's also a movie that's very long, is JFK to 9/11, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. It talks a lot more about JFK and it really went into World War II a lot and stuff, but it is very informative, and if it's too long, you just watch it in a couple of sittings. And as far as like what people can do, one of these breakthroughs was when we got Richard Gage on C-SPAN. Richard Gage is the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and it just happened organically that people were calling into this C-SPAN show, I think it's called National Journal, where they allow call-ins on this C-SPAN television show, and people can ask questions of the important people that are on. And folks kept bringing up 9/11. And when Chertoff was on there, they were just hammering him. It was like every other call was like, you know, pinning his involvement on 9/11 and throwing it in his face. So we got the idea to do this in an organized fashion. And Andy Steele, Architects and Engineers, would call up everybody on his big list. And like, can you call in at this day and this time? And you call in and you say you want to talk about whatever, you know, healthcare or something innocent, whatever they're discussing. You got to know a little bit about who's on there and what they're going to be talking about. You don't tell them you're going to do 9/11, and then you won't get on. But then you get in what you can real quick before they cut you off. And after years of this, C-SPAN relented and gave into the demand, and they had Richard Gage on. And it was a really great interview. If you just YouTube Richard Gage on C-SPAN, you'll find it. So that didn't cost anything. It cost us some time. You know, you had to have a phone to make the phone call. It wasn't real hard. It was actually kind of fun, you know, calling in and harassing them like that. So there's ways that people can be involved and make a difference and do something, and you'll feel better if you're doing something. If you know, I think a lot of people in the movement get really depressed. They know how bad things are.
Yep, absolutely. That's a common occurrence, actually. The people that understand this, get into this, understand the degree of deception, because like we're talking about fundamental changes in your how you understand the world. when you understand that your government and the media are lying to you and have lied to you for 15 years, this is very disturbing, because we're raised to believe that we have democratic elections, that we have a democratic republic here, and that the media we have the free press, and we live in the greatest country in the world. When these things start falling down, when you see that the media has lied to us, the government's lied to us, our churches have not been truthful about this. They have not stood up for the truth. Our universities have failed to investigate this and other things that are important. Then you begin to wonder, what kind of country am I living in?
Right.
And that is just that alone, just apprehending, understanding 9/11 truth is a fundamental change for people. It's a tough thing. So that's why I recommend that when people become informed, that they organize themselves with other like-minded people. Because one thing is for sure is that the people that I meet on this tour who are involved in 9/11 truth are great people, because they stand for truth, they're morally courageous, and they're against war. So these are good people.
Yeah.
They're extraordinary people. And then thirdly, taking action, because taking action will make you feel better, that you're doing something to rectify a very dismal situation. This is not something that we can just sit back and think that our country will become normal again, in a few years, that we'll skate through this. No, you're not going to skate through this. Something has to be done. And in fact, something revolutionary has to happen in this country. Yeah. We have to have a revolutionary change in which we wipe out and we remove all this old guard that is criminal. The criminals have to be arrested, and the controlling authority in this country has to be returned to the people.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened, through use of fraudulent electronic voting machines, and over a period of time, we, the American people, have been disenfranchised.
Yes. So
we're treated like cattle in this country. We are treated like the state that has nothing to say.
Yeah.
And that has to change. We have to regain sovereignty, and in our country, the sovereignty rests with the people. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we have a tough job. It's a tough job ahead of us, but we have to do it. But the first step is, of course, becoming undeceived.
Right. Becoming informed, knowing the real deal, knowing what's going on. And it is depressing, and it is hard to face. It is scary, but you can handle it. What do they say? God won't give you anything you can't handle.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Something that happened that really had me scratching my head and wondering it maybe figured out or not, could be wrong about it. Unprecedented in American history, under Obama, we had these purges of the military. Mm-hmm. Anytime someone makes it to a really high rank, like mm-hmm. general, I mean, that's it. They're made. They're like a made man in the army. Mm-hmm. Ain't nothing gonna happen. And all these guys were getting fired, mm-hmm. a whole bunch of them. And I wondered if maybe a military coup was forming.
Mm-hmm. That could very well be, that they're, and at the same time, by removing those people and putting in new people, his people, mm-hmm. or people that his administration approved of, is like basically a regime change within the military.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, just recently, Obama appointed the first openly gay man to be the Secretary of the U.S. Army. And a week later, there was this attack at the Orlando club, which was a gay club primarily, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, you look at this and you say, wow, is that a coincidence? So that the Secretary of the Army, who is a gay man, reads the newspaper and gets the information that the shooter in Orlando is killing people because they're gay, and he's Islamic. Well, how does that shake his world? So he's going to say, whoa, these people are coming over here from Afghanistan or from Islamic world, and they're shooting gay people in my country because they're gay? So, I mean, it's like, does he subscribe? Does he believe the official narrative? He probably does. Right. Because that's one thing that you have to understand, is that our politicians and our presidents and everybody in the political class, mm-hmm. they are informed by a very special sources, but they're not necessarily privy to the real truth.
Right. But the truth of 9/11 has been spreading through the military.
Yes.
You know, that is something that has been going on. So that was why I wondered if maybe these guys were getting together and thinking about actually performing a coup, which would be, in this case, a good thing.
Yes.
Usually military coup is really bad, like in Chile or whatever. But this would have been wonderful if it could have happened. Or something else. What was it?
Well, the military.
Sabrowski.
Yeah.
You know him, right? You guys have talked, or?
Yeah, we've had some correspondence. When Alan Sabrowski came out in 2009 and 2010 with his statements about Israel, in his opinion, being behind 9/11, and that he, as the former director of studies at the U.S. Army War College, he said that he had made this information known to people at the highest levels of the military. Mm-hmm. And I was, I was very happy to see that somebody with his credentials was coming out endorsing, basically, and validating my thesis.
Yeah.
I thought that was wonderful. And so I was in touch with him a little bit, and he said we were going to do some article together. That never happened, but I mean, he's done a great thing. And I sent my books, the set of books, to many universities across this country, complimentary copies, and I sent them also to the war colleges and the military colleges, because they need to have this information, because it's our history.
Right.
It's that simple.
Well, the military has been abused, sorely abused, and a lot of them know it, and they're really angry. And a lot of folks who support veterans and support the military are not happy, even if they may still be in the 9/11 men. The suicide rate, there's more dying from suicide than in battle. Everybody's nervous about this next presidency and what that's going to mean in terms of war or potential war. So it's an angle. If you know people in the military, you have family or friends, talk to them about this stuff. Bring it up gently, because it's really difficult. We just had a Air Force veteran, female, come out with a really nice video on 9/11. It's real short, just a few minutes, but she woke up while she was over there. Mm-hmm. Somebody over there had some information, DVD or flyer or whatever, she didn't say, but while she's over there in Afghanistan or wherever she was, wearing the uniform and doing the stuff, finds out she was completely deceived about 9/11.
Well, it's very important. It's very important that people understand the deception of 9/11, because they are throwing more logs on the fire every time this happens.
Yeah.
So this summer being a very political summer, I expect that there will be a flurry of terror attacks.
It's sure starting out that way.
And the thing is that, like, the recent attack in Istanbul a couple days ago,
right,
at the airport in Istanbul, killed, I think, 43 people. And it was a very terrible attack, bombs and explosives and things, and guns. But this is the kind of thing that happens on a daily basis in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq, and in Syria. If only 43 people died on one day in Syria, that'd be a good day for them.
Yeah, right.
And so it's like the media focuses on the Turkish incident as if that's like so important, but because they're trying to they're going to make something out of that.
Right.
But in the same paper that had the coverage yesterday about on page 8, there was a similar attack in Kabul,
right,
and killed 50 people. But nobody hears about that.
It's a paragraph.
Yeah, just a paragraph.
On page 8.
But like I said, this happens every day of the week in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq. But the thing is that these terror attacks are being used to change public opinion.
Right.
And they're being used for political mileage. Right. And I think that we really have to be aware of the theatrical aspect of terror, that terror is theater, and that the primary audience for the terrorism is the American public and the world public. That's who they're trying to change, because it's going to be until we get this terrorism identified and uprooted, until we find the actual perpetrators, until we actually identify the real culprits and uproot them
not
and
gonna
put them
stop.
in jail, it's not going to stop. Thank you. It's not going to stop.
Not going to stop. Let's talk for just a minute about some of the strange anomalies about this Istanbul thing. It's been pretty recent, but it didn't take very long, and they had identified these suicide bombers.
Yeah,
You blow yourself up, how do they identify you?
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And wasn't this just like days after Turkey agreed to have...
Yes, relations with Israel and Russia. The day before this began, the day before the attack in Istanbul, Israel and Turkey had patched up their relations that were broken as a result of the Israeli attack on the ship Mavi Marmara that was going to Gaza Strip.
That was
9 years ago.
Yeah.
Something like, and likewise, Turkey had patched up relations at least as much as they could, I suppose, with Russia after shooting down the Russian plane in Syria. And then suddenly this bomb goes off, and then the president of Erdogan, the president of the country, comes out with statements and saying exactly the kind of thing that you would expect to hear from Netanyahu. You see, so it's like the war on terror doctrine has become internationally accepted.
Yeah. A little bit more about that ship. That was there was a blockade on Gaza, and they weren't letting anything in or out, and we had some relief ships trying to bring just like food and medicines and stuff. Cynthia McKinney, I believe, was on one of those ships. She was a Democratic congresswoman from Georgia who ran for president and got my vote. And Ken O'Keefe, he's a former U.S. Marine, very outspoken now, doing a great job. He's on his own tour, isn't he?
He was.
Yeah, I think he was into Canada. But, there was people killed, right?
Oh yeah, I think 9 or a dozen Turkish people mostly. One was a Turkish-American boy. They were killed, and it caused a disruption of relations between Turkey and Israel. But at the same time, I saw a report the other day that said that ICTS, that Israeli security company, had operations at the Turkish airport.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but I saw a report to that effect.
Right. So that's the same company that was doing all the security at the towers.
They're the same company. They were doing
the airports.
Yeah, they were doing security. They were doing security in London and in Boston and New York and Brussels when they had the attack.
Anytime we have something happen, they're doing security.
Yeah. It would seem that Israeli security is an invitation to terrorism.
And Brazil, hosting the Olympics, rejected them, right?
Yeah, there's been a dispute there. I don't know if they're back in or not out, but yes, Brazil didn't want that Israeli security at the Olympics.
Yeah.
But it's all these things are fluid, and that's another thing about this war on terror thing and our political situation. It's always fluid. Everything's changing.
Right.
So the people that are running this terrorism and things, they have these strategic rooms where they have the world on a big table, and they decide what they're going to do here or there.
Right.
It's like a game for them.
And they have access to the very quickest, most accurate information of what's going on everywhere, all the time. And the situation room, right?
Right.
There, where they can be moving the chess pieces around.
Right. And that's the game they're playing, though. And so but we need to understand that the game is being played, and we need to understand who are the players and what are their goals. When we understand those basic things, then we can have we have a fighting chance. Because otherwise, if you're just a deceived person and you accept all of this logic of war, then you're inclined to make bad decisions for yourself and your family, and let your children go into the military or support the war and hate the Muslims and things like that.
Yeah.
And you fall into those traps, and because these like I said, these acts of terrorism are meant to affect us. And if they do a number of attacks in which Islamic Muslims are seen as the perpetrators, it's going to cause a problem.
Yeah.
A social problem. And one of the things they're doing is that they're creating cracks within the American body politic between black and white, Muslim and Christian and Jew, between Anglo and Hispanic, between gay and straight. And then they exacerbate these fractures with violence,
Right.
with terrorism.
Right.
This is exactly what they did in Iraq. So they can play the same game they played in Iraq in this country.
Something I remember from my learning of real history was after the Civil War, they actually passed laws against blacks and whites hanging out together, and then later against blacks and whites marrying. So the reason they had to pass those laws is because that's what people were doing. They were getting along. They were just being people, learning to get along and live together, and sometimes fall in love and have families, make babies together. And that's not what the government wanted. You know, they wanted the blacks and the whites fighting each other. So just remember all the time, it doesn't matter conservative, liberal, black, white, Hispanic, gay, straight, whatever. I mean, their goal all the time is to keep us divided and fighting each other and distracted by all of this while they run amok and kill the planet.
Exactly. Exactly. By keeping us divided, they're able to control us and plunder the nation, because these people, the people that are running this game, don't have a nation.
Right.
Their
loyalty is to themselves and their evil cohorts, and they, you know,
That's
they
right.
can control the world. They can go anywhere in the world.
And essentially, it's a spiritual battle. It's a battle between, you know, light and dark, between love and hate, between, you know, fear and bravery,
Truth and
it's
lies.
truth and lies and everything. And so it's we the people have to undeceive ourselves and wage the good fight.
Right.
Because as we now know, 15 years after 9/11, we are not getting any support from the government, the media, the universities, or the churches.
Thanks for reminding me again, universities. There's a big thing going on with architects and engineers sponsoring it. The chair of the environmental and civil engineering departments at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks is doing a big project on evaluating the causes of World Trade Center 7's collapse. It's going to include a finite element analysis and a computer model. The NIST computer model, they will not release any of the parameters or inputs or anything like that. It's all undercover. So this will be a very big challenge to the academic community when this is complete, and it shows very clearly that the official story is impossible and it could not have happened that way. A lot of funds need to be raised for this. It's about $500,000, about $400,000, I think. Trying to remember the name of the program. If you just go to the AE 9/11 Truth website, you can find it. There'll be a news blurb up there about it. You can track down the exact place where you could contribute a little something if you want to. And we all got to pull together. We really do, because I mean, things are bad and they're going to probably get worse. But you know, how much worse can they go before, like, all's lost? You know, if you got kids, you got grandkids, you need to be working. They don't have a future right now, and we need to give them one.
Yeah, well, the war on terror is costing, you know, like as I said, something like $300 million a day.
Yeah.
And it's already an incredible amount of money has been spent on this, and this is all borrowed money. So the borrowed money comes from these private banks and banks like the Rothschild banks and whatnot, and it puts our whole country into a predicament where we become the most indebted nation on the planet. And when you're indebted to that degree, you are enslaved.
Right.
Our leaders are enslaved to the banksters to whom they owe the money.
Yeah, that's right. The debt is the new slavery. You don't have where you own people outright and they are your slaves, but this system controls us by keeping us in debt.
Right.
And so they do control us.
Yes.
We have to.
They keep us in debt as individuals, as citizens, as individuals, and as nations.
Yeah.
And it becomes a tool of control.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a very good piece of a film. I can't really recommend the whole film, but if you look up Zeitgeist Addendum, get through the really strange and interesting, kind of weird and scary intro to the very first 10, 15 minutes or something. They really explain the monetary system very well with graphics and things. The the fiat money from the Federal Reserve, which is unconstitutional and causes the inflation in the fractional reserve lending of all the lesser banks that creates the money out of thin air, and the dollar, I think, is teetering, and we really could have a financial collapse either here or worldwide, and in a way I would really welcome it. I mean, I don't want to wish hard times on anybody, but as long as this system perpetuates, that's not good. So anything to bring it to a screeching halt, I'd be all for. But then you got to be careful of building something that is sensible and good, and the ashes. This would be, like something that may happen. I can't figure it out sometimes, because you look at it and so it should have already collapsed long ago, but they keep propping it up because it's the system. They only have control and power so long as everything is kind of functioning. But sometimes they've got to know that it can't last, and it will someday collapse like a house of cards, that it is.
Well, that's exactly right. Like you said, they keep propping it up. Like in 2008, 2009, as George Bush was leaving and Obama was coming on, they bailed out AIG, Maurice Greenberg's company,
right?
That had basically insured the derivatives and the profits of a number of banks like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America. Now, in a real capitalist world, those banks should have been allowed to fail.
Right.
AIG should have failed, and these criminal banks and these crooked banks should have gone out of business, and their wrongdoing should have been exposed.
Yeah.
But instead of letting that happen, the U.S. taxpayer was made to bail out these big banks, AIG and the big banks, which was wrong.
Right.
Completely wrong.
And this was, an example where the people were saying no and hell no was the only response. Nobody wanted this, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
Right.
And it was across the board.
Right.
Very few people.
There was one senator from South Carolina that said, as they were discussing this bailout, that he was getting calls from constituents 1,000 to 1 against the bailout, but it still went ahead.
Yeah.
That gives you an idea that the power that these banksters have, that what the American people are against it 1,000 to 1, and they still get their way. So that's what I'm saying, is that we need to have a revolution in this country in which the shadow government and the people who are behind the crimocracy that reigns in this country are arrested and purged from the government.
Yeah.
Until that happens, this is going to continue.
And a new system put in place that is not going to allow this sort of abuse. We didn't have a Federal Reserve till 1913, and we didn't pay income tax before 1913.
Right.
And we had things that were okay. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. There's always ups and downs, and people can argue and differ on capitalist, socialist, controlled economies and market economies and things like that, and that's fine. I think it's great for people to have those discussions and all, but what we have now is an absolute rip-off in every way imaginable that is going to lead to a very bad place.
Well, like I said, the murder of Kennedy and 9/11, and the fact that our government and media are covering up both of these crimes that changed America, indicates that the people who are behind the murder of John F. Kennedy and the people who are behind 9/11 control our government and control our media. That is what deductive logic will tell you.
That is the actual government. It won't matter if it's Hillary or Trump
Right.
or Sanders or whoever, that same cabal of unelected, just largely unknown, I mean, we know some of them, criminals are going to be still running the show.
Right.
The CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, the banks,
The banksters.
the banksters, yes.
And that's why we have to have a fundamental restoration of American sovereignty.
Yes.
And actually, you know, our founding fathers and the documents that founded this country are precious and worth saving and worth restoring.
Yeah.
The problem is that we have gotten away from the Constitution. Its powers have been diluted and it's been turned on its head.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
We need to get back to constitutional monarch, republic in this country.
I agree 100%, and it can happen if you know, stranger things have happened. So we need to pull together and make it happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity,
Thank you.
and
Thank you for coming on.
I hope the listeners and viewers have a better understanding of 9/11 now. And I would recommend that if they'd like to know more about my book, they can go to my website, bolin.com, and they can order the book, Solving 9/11, and the companion book, Solving 9/11, the original articles from me. The two books together, I ask a $40 donation, and that helps me to carry on the tour.
Yep.
This is my 4th tour in the United States in the last 2 years, and you know, it's made a change. It's made a change. We've made a lot of people. A lot of people have become aware of the reality of 9/11 and have become undeceived. And so that's why my cover is an optimistic cover. I have the light shining on a nation in the dark, because that's what happens when you undeceive people. A light goes on in their head,
Yeah.
and they realize that they've been living in the shadows, that they've been living in the darkness.
Yeah.
And so I recommend that, and I look forward to the rest of the tour.
Great. Yeah. We sure wish you well. We're really glad that you
Thank
made
very
it
much.
here.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
It's been a pleasure.
And hopefully I'll be back on here. You guys see me another time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's really special to have you here.
Yeah, it's been a great visit, and I look forward to coming back to this part of the country soon.
Yeah. Come on back through. We'll get a bigger room, have more people in it.
Thanks.